Welcome to Galactic Dream Station. Here we explore real encounters with the unexplained, collected from witnesses and hidden archives. If you enjoy these mysteries, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more. Now, find a quiet place, settle in, and let us begin tonight's account. My name's Dolores, and I'm 74 years old now. Back in 1998, I was working as a seamstress in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Had been for 30 years at that point. My husband Earl had passed 2 summers before, and I was still getting used to being alone in that big house on Maple Street. It was late August, and the county fair had come to town like it did every year. Usually I'd go with Earl, but that year I hadn't planned on it. Too many memories, you know. But my neighbor Gladys kept pestering me about it. Said I needed to get out more. That Earl wouldn't want me sitting around feeling sorry for myself. So on Thursday night, I finally gave in. Gladys picked me up around 7:30, and we drove down to the fairgrounds. The whole place was lit up like Christmas, with all those colored lights and the smell of funnel cake and corn dogs in the air. Kids running around with balloons and cotton candy. It should have been cheerful, but something felt off to me from the moment we walked through the gates. The rides were all the usual ones. The tilt-a-whirl, the bumper cars, some little kiddie train that went around in circles. But there was this one ride that caught my attention. A Ferris wheel, but not like any I'd ever seen before. It was enormous, maybe twice as tall as a normal one, and it had these strange lights running up and down the spokes. Not regular carnival lights, mind you. These were white and blue and seemed to pulse in a rhythm that didn't match the music playing from the other rides. Gladys wanted to ride the carousel, so we got in line for that. While we were waiting, I kept looking over at that Ferris wheel. The odd thing was, I couldn't see anyone operating it. All the other rides had teenagers or young men running them, taking tickets, helping people on and off. But this one just kept turning, slow and steady, with what looked like empty cars. After the carousel, Gladys wanted to get some elephant ears, so we walked over to the food trucks. That's when I noticed something that made my skin crawl. Every few minutes, I'd catch glimpses of people walking toward that big Ferris wheel. But they weren't walking normal. They moved like they were sleepwalking, real slow and purposeful. And they were all alone, not in groups like you'd expect at a fair. I watched one woman, probably in her 40s, with brown hair and a ponytail. She walked right up to the Ferris wheel, got in one of the cars without anyone helping her, and up she went. I waited to see her come back down, but after 3 full rotations, her car was empty. Just empty. Gladys was chattering away about her sister's new grandbaby, but I wasn't listening. I kept watching that wheel. A teenage boy walked up next, same strange, slow walk. Got in a car, went around 3 times, and then his car was empty too. Gladys, I said, interrupting her story about the baby's first tooth. Do you see that Ferris wheel over there? She looked where I was pointing. What Ferris wheel? Dolores. I looked again. The big wheel was still there, still turning, still pulsing with those strange lights. That one right there. The really tall one with the blue and white lights. Gladys squinted and shook her head. Honey, I don't see any Ferris wheel, just the regular rides. That's when I started to feel really scared. I grabbed Gladys by the arm and pulled her closer to where I could see the wheel clearly. Right there. Gladys, it's right there. But she just looked confused and a little worried about me. Dolores, are you feeling all right? Maybe we should go home. I didn't want to go home. I needed to understand what I was seeing. So I told Gladys I was fine, just tired, and maybe we could sit down for a few minutes. We found a bench near the ring toss game, and I positioned myself so I could keep watching. Over the next hour, I saw maybe a dozen people walk up to that wheel. Men, women, teenagers, even one little girl who couldn't have been more than 10 years old. All of them with that same sleepwalking gait. All of them getting in cars and disappearing after 3 rotations. The worst part was the sounds. Or rather, the lack of sounds. A Ferris wheel should creak and groan and make all kinds of mechanical noises. This one was completely silent, even when the wind picked up, and I could hear it rattling the signs on the game booths. That wheel turned without making a sound. Around 9:30, Gladys said she was getting tired and wanted to head home. I was relieved, honestly. The whole thing was making me feel sick to my stomach. As we walked back toward the parking area, I took one last look over my shoulder at the wheel. That's when I saw him. A man in a dark suit, standing right next to the wheel. He wasn't operating it, just standing there watching. But here's the thing that still gives me nightmares 26 years later. He was looking right at me. Not at the people getting on the ride, not at the crowd, but directly at me. Even from that distance, maybe 100 yards away, I could feel his eyes on me. And when he saw me looking back, he smiled. Gladys dropped me off at home and I went straight to bed. But I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all those people disappearing, about that man in the suit, about the way Gladys couldn't see what was right in front of her face. The next morning, I called the newspaper to ask about the fair. The woman who answered said it was running through Sunday, same as always. I asked her specifically about the rides, if there were any new ones this year. "No, Mum," she said. "Same rides as last year. The tilt-a-whirl, the bumper cars, the carousel, and the little train for the kids. Oh, and the ring toss and the duck pond game. No Ferris wheel." I asked. "No, ma'am. Haven't had a Ferris wheel at the county fair in over 15 years. Not since that accident in '82. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring out the window toward town. That afternoon, I drove back to the fairgrounds by myself. In the daylight, everything looked normal. The regular rides, the game booths, families walking around having a good time. No Ferris wheel. But that night, I couldn't help myself. I drove back after dark, and there it was again, turning slowly in the distance, pulsing with those blue and white lights. I parked at the edge of the lot and watched for about an hour. Same thing as the night before. People walking up like they were in a trance, getting in the cars, disappearing after 3 rotations. This time I tried to follow one of them, a middle-aged man in a flannel shirt and jeans. He walked right past me like I wasn't there, heading straight for the wheel. I got out of my car and followed him, staying about 20 feet back. As we got closer to the wheel, I started to feel strange, dizzy and lightheaded like I was walking through thick fog. The sounds of the fair seemed to fade away, and all I could hear was this low humming noise that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The man reached the wheel and got into one of the cars. I wanted to call out to him, to warn him somehow, but I couldn't make my voice work. The car started its slow climb upward, and I stood there watching, waiting to see what would happen. On the 3rd rotation, as his car reached the top of the wheel, there was a flash of light. Not from the wheel itself, but from somewhere above it. Like lightning, but without any thunder. And when the car came back down to where I could see it clearly, it was empty. That's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, and there was the man in the dark suit. Up close, I could see that his skin was too pale, too smooth. His eyes were completely black, no whites at all, and when he smiled at me, his teeth were too sharp. "Hello, Dolores," he said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from inside my own head. "We've been waiting for you." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. He kept smiling at me, and I could feel myself starting to walk toward the wheel, just like all the others had done. But then I heard Earl's voice, as clear as if he was standing right next to me. "Fight it, Dolores, you don't belong to them." Somehow, that broke whatever hold they had on me. I stumbled backward, away from the man in the suit, away from the wheel. He didn't follow me, just stood there watching as I made my way back to my car on shaking legs. I drove home as fast as I could, and I didn't go back to the fair again that year, or any year since for that matter. But sometimes, on late August nights when the air is thick and still, I can hear that humming sound drifting in through my bedroom window. And I know that somewhere, that wheel is still turning, still taking people who can't say no. I never told anyone about this, not even my daughter when she calls from California. Who would believe an old woman's crazy story about a Ferris wheel that doesn't exist? But I know what I saw, and I know that if Earl hadn't been watching over me that night, I would have disappeared too, just like all the others. The fair still comes to Cedar Falls every August. I see the advertisements in the paper, hear the kids at the grocery store talking about it. But I stay home with my doors locked and my curtains drawn until it's over. Because I know they're still waiting for me. Story 2, Cotton Candy Dreams. Hey, so this happened to me when I was like 16, back in 2009. I'm Marcus, and I was living in Bakersfield, California at the time with my mom and little sister. We weren't exactly rich or anything, but Mom always made sure we got to do normal kid stuff, you know. Like when the carnival came to town, she'd give us each $20 and tell us to have fun. This particular carnival set up in the parking lot of the old Kmart that had been closed for like 3 years. It was one of those traveling ones that moves from town to town, not the big fancy fair that comes once a year. Just a handful of rides, some games, and food trucks. But when you're 16 and bored out of your mind in Bakersfield, even a sketchy carnival looks pretty good. I went with my girlfriend at the time, Jessica, and my buddy Tyler. We were planning to ride everything, win some stuffed animals, and basically just act like the teenagers we were. It was a Friday night in October, and the weather was perfect. Not too hot, little bit of a breeze. The kind of night that makes you feel like anything could happen. The first weird thing I noticed was the cotton candy stand. Now, I've been to a lot of carnivals and fairs in my life, and cotton candy is always the same. Pink or blue, spun on a paper cone, tastes like sugar because that's literally what it is. But this stand had like 15 different colors. Purple, green, orange, silver, even this weird black color that looked kind of sick. The guy running the stand was probably in his 50s, with gray hair and these really intense blue eyes. He kept staring at us as we walked around, like he was trying to memorize our faces or something. Jessica noticed it too. "That cotton candy dude is creeping me out," she whispered as we got in line for the zipper. "Yeah, he's been watching us since we got here." Tyler agreed. "Probably just bored. I bet he doesn't get a lot of customers for that weird colored stuff." But I was curious. After we rode the zipper and the tilt-a-whirl, I convinced them to go check out the cotton candy stand. The guy smiled real big when he saw us coming. "Well, hello there, young folks," he said in this voice that was almost too friendly. "Looking for something sweet tonight?" "What's with all the different colors?" I asked, pointing at the display. His smile got even wider. "Each color is a different flavor, son, and each flavor gives you different dreams." Jessica laughed. "Dreams? It's just cotton candy, dude." "Oh no, miss. This is very special cotton candy, made with ingredients you won't find anywhere else." He leaned forward over the counter. "The purple tastes like grape, but it'll give you dreams of flying. The green is apple, and you'll dream of talking to animals. The silver—" He paused dramatically. "The silver tastes like starlight, and you'll dream of places that don't exist on any map." Tyler rolled his eyes. "Okay, that's a cool sales pitch, but we'll just take regular pink." "No pink tonight," the man said, still smiling. "Only the special flavors." I was getting a weird vibe from this guy, but I was also kind of intrigued. I mean, what if he wasn't just making stuff up? What if there really was something different about this cotton candy? "How much?" I asked. $5 each. "But I'll tell you what." He looked around like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. "Since you three seem like adventurous types, I'll give you a deal. $10 for all three, but you each have to try a different color." That seemed like a good deal, so I handed over the money. The guy spun up 3 cones of cotton candy. Purple for Jessica, green for Tyler, and silver for me. The silver one was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. It actually seemed to shimmer in the light, and when he handed it to me, it felt strangely warm. "Now remember," he said as we walked away, "eat it all before you go to sleep tonight, and don't share with anyone else. The dreams only work if you eat the whole thing yourself." We found a picnic table and sat down to try our cotton candy. Jessica's purple stuff tasted exactly like grape, nothing weird about it. Tyler's green was apple-flavored, just like the guy said. But mine was different. It didn't taste like anything I'd ever had before. Sweet, but also kind of metallic. And there was this tingling sensation on my tongue, like I was licking a battery. "How's yours?" Jessica asked. "Weird," I said honestly, "but not bad weird. Just different." We finished our cotton candy and spent the rest of the evening riding rides and playing games. Tyler won Jessica a stuffed elephant at the ring toss, and I managed to knock down enough bottles to get a little mirror with a skull on it. Normal carnival stuff. But that night, after I got home and went to bed, the dreams started. I was standing in what looked like a desert, but the sand was silver and the sky was this deep purple color. There were 3 moons hanging overhead, each one a different size. And in the distance, I could see lights. Not city lights, but something else. Something that pulsed and moved like it was alive. I started walking toward the lights, and as I got closer, I realized they were coming from buildings. But not buildings like anything on Earth. These were tall and twisted, like they'd been grown instead of built. And they were full of things. Creatures that looked almost human but not quite right. Too tall, or with too many arms, or with faces that seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. One of them noticed me and walked over. It was wearing what looked like a business suit, but the suit was made of some kind of material that moved and flowed like water. "Welcome, Marcus," it said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me? How do you know my name?" "We know all the names of those who taste the starlight. You're not the first, and you won't be the last." "What is this place?" "This is where we live. Between the spaces in your world. Between the thoughts in your mind. We've been watching your kind for a very long time, learning about you, studying you. I wanted to run, but my feet wouldn't move. Nothing you harmful. We're just curious. Your species is so chaotic, so unpredictable. We find that fascinating." The creature gestured toward the twisted buildings. "Would you like to see more?" And somehow, Even though I was scared, I found myself nodding. We walked through what I guess you could call streets, past more of those flowing buildings and more of those almost human creatures. Some of them waved at me, like I was a tourist or something. "How long have you been watching us?" I asked. "Time works differently here. What you call centuries, we experience as moments. But we've been particularly interested in your carnivals and fairs. There's something about them that creates openings. Thin places between your world and ours. The cotton candy? That's how you do it, isn't it? That's how you bring people here." The Starlight cotton candy, yes. It's made with materials from our world. It allows you to visit us safely in your dreams. Most of your kind would go insane if they came here while awake. We stopped in front of a building that was taller than the rest, with lights spiraling up its surface like DNA. "This is our observatory," the creature said. "From here we can see into your world, watch your lives unfold." Inside, the walls were covered with what looked like windows, but instead of showing the outside, they showed scenes from Earth. People going about their daily lives, completely unaware they were being watched. I saw a woman feeding pigeons in a park, a man reading a newspaper on a bus, kids playing soccer in a field. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked. "Because you're going to help us understand your kind better. Every time you eat the Starlight cotton candy, you'll come back here. And every time you come back, we'll learn a little more about what it means to be human." I woke up in my own bed, sweating and confused. The dream had felt so real, so vivid, I could still taste that metallic sweetness in my mouth. At school the next day, I found Jessica and Tyler at lunch and asked them about their dreams. "Dude, it was the craziest thing," Tyler said. "I dreamed I could talk to animals. Not just talk to them, but really understand them. My dog told me all about the neighborhood cats and their secret meetings." Jessica was equally excited. "I was flying!" Like actually flying, not just falling with style. "I went all over the city, saw everything from above. It felt so real." I told them about my dream, but they just laughed and said I had a weird imagination. They didn't believe the cotton candy had anything to do with it. But I knew better. The carnival was supposed to be in town for a week, and every night I found myself drawn back to that cotton candy stand. The man with the blue eyes was always there, always smiling, always ready with another silver cone of Starlight cotton candy. And every night I went back to that strange world between spaces. I learned a lot during those visits. The creatures who called themselves the observers had been studying humanity for thousands of years. They didn't mean us any harm. They were just curious about us. They found our emotions particularly fascinating since they didn't experience feelings the way we do. On my last visit, before the carnival left town, the creature in the business suit gave me something. A small silver coin that felt warm in my hand. "Keep this," it said. "When you're older, when you're ready to understand more, hold the coin and think of us. We'll find you again." I still have that coin. I'm 29 now, married with a kid of my own. Sometimes I take it out and look at it, remembering those strange dreams from when I was 16. I've never tried to contact the observers again, though. I'm not sure I'm ready to understand more, like they said. But sometimes, when I'm at a carnival or fair with my family, I look for cotton candy stands with unusual colors. I've never found another one like that first one, but I keep looking. Because part of me wants to go back to that place between spaces to see what else the observers might want to show me. And part of me is terrified of what I might learn. Story 3. The House of Mirrors. I need to tell someone about this, even if nobody believes me. My name is Elena Kowalski, and I'm a 38-year-old accountant from Detroit. I have 2 kids, a mortgage, and a Honda Civic with 160,000 miles on it. I'm about as ordinary as they come. This happened 3 years ago, in the summer of 2021. My husband Mike had taken the kids camping for the weekend, and I had the house to myself for the first time in months. I was planning to catch up on laundry, maybe read a book, just enjoy the quiet. But Friday evening, I got a text from my sister Amy. She's 5 years younger than me and has always been the adventurous one in the family. The text said there was a small carnival that had set up in the parking lot of the abandoned shopping mall on 8 Mile. And did I want to check it out with her? Normally I would have said no. I'm not really a carnival person. Too crowded, too loud, too many germs. But I'd been feeling restless lately, like I was stuck in a routine that was slowly suffocating me. So I texted back yes, and Amy picked me up around 7:30. The carnival was smaller than I expected. Maybe 8 or 10 rides, a handful of game booths, and a few food trucks. Nothing fancy, but it had that classic carnival atmosphere. Flashing lights, calliope music, the smell of popcorn and fried dough in the air. Amy wanted to ride the scrambler first, but I talked her into walking around and checking everything out before we committed to anything. That's when I saw the House of Mirrors. It was set up in what used to be a department store with a big banner stretched across the entrance that said Infinite Reflections in red and gold letters. There was a man standing outside, probably in his 60s, with a white beard and wearing a red vest like an old-fashioned carnival barker. "Step right up, ladies," he called out when he saw us approaching. "See yourselves as you've never seen yourselves before. The mirrors don't lie, but they don't always tell the truth you expect." Amy laughed. "That's a weird sales pitch, old man." He smiled, and I noticed his teeth were very white and very straight, too perfect for someone his age. "The best attractions always are a little weird, miss. $5 each, or $8 for both of you." Amy was already pulling out her wallet, but something about the man made me hesitate. There was something in his eyes, a kind of knowing look that made me uncomfortable. "What's different about your mirrors?" I asked. "They show you possibilities," he said. "Different versions of yourself. Different choices you might have made. Different lives you might have lived." "That's just marketing nonsense," Amy said, handing him $10. "They're just regular mirrors arranged to create optical illusions." The man pocketed the money and gestured toward the entrance. "Go ahead and see for yourselves. Take your time. There's no rush." The entrance led into a narrow corridor lined with mirrors on both sides. At first, they seemed normal enough. I could see Amy and myself reflected back and forth into infinity, getting smaller and smaller until they disappeared into darkness. But as we walked deeper into the maze, the reflection started to change. In one mirror, I saw myself but with longer hair and wearing a dress I'd never owned. In another, I looked the same, but Amy wasn't there. She was replaced by a woman I didn't recognize, someone with dark skin and a bright smile. "This is trippy," Amy said. But when I looked at her reflection in the mirror next to me, she was wearing a wedding dress and looked about 10 years younger. "Amy, look at yourself in this mirror," I said, pointing. But when she looked, she saw something different than what I was seeing. "I just see regular me," she said. "What are you seeing?" I described the wedding dress and she frowned. "That's weird. I see you in a business suit, like you're giving a presentation or something." We kept walking, and the reflections got stranger. I saw versions of myself that were older, younger, thinner, heavier. In one mirror, I had short gray hair and was wearing scrubs, like I was a nurse or doctor. In another, I was holding a baby that wasn't one of my kids. But the most disturbing one was near the end of the maze. I saw myself, but I looked exhausted and sad. I was sitting alone in what looked like a different house, staring out a window with tears on my face. There was no wedding ring on my finger. "Elena, you need to see this," Amy said from across the corridor. I walked over to where she was standing and looked into the mirror she was pointing at. What I saw made my blood run cold. It was me, but not me. This version of Elena was thinner, with wild hair and dark circles under her eyes. She was wearing clothes that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. And she was looking directly at me, not at her own reflection, but at me. As I watched, this other Elena pressed her hands against the glass from her side and mouthed words I couldn't hear. She looked desperate, like she was trying to warn me about something. "Amy," I whispered, "can you see what I'm seeing?" But when I turned around, Amy wasn't there. I was alone in the mirror maze, and suddenly all the reflections were wrong. Every mirror showed a different version of me, and all of them were looking directly at me instead of showing normal reflections. Some were smiling, some were crying. Some looked angry or afraid. I tried to find my way back to the entrance, but the corridors seemed to have changed. Every turn led to more mirrors, more wrong reflections, more versions of myself staring back at me. That's when I heard the voice. Elena. It was my own voice, but coming from somewhere else. I followed the sound and found myself in a circular room I hadn't seen before, surrounded by mirrors that showed the same reflection. Me, but older, maybe in my 50s, with gray streaks in my hair. "You need to listen to me," the older Elena said. All the mirrors spoke in unison, creating an echo effect that made my head spin. "You're not supposed to be here yet." "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling ridiculous for talking to my own reflection. "This place shows you possibilities, different paths your life could take. But you're seeing too much too early. It's going to change things." "Change what things?" "Your choices. Your future. Once you see the possibilities, you can't unsee them. And some of them are better left unknown." I looked around at all the mirrors, all showing that same older version of myself. "Are you real?" "As real as you are. I'm what you become if you make certain choices. But there are other versions of you that make different choices. And some of them," the older Elena's face became sad, "some of them make terrible mistakes." What kind of mistakes? The kind that destroy families. The kind that leave you alone and bitter and full of regret. Before I could ask what she meant, the mirrors began to change again. Now they showed scenes instead of just reflections. I saw myself having an affair with a coworker. I saw myself drinking too much and yelling at my kids. I saw myself walking out on Mike, leaving him to raise our children alone. Stop, I said, closing my eyes. I don't want to see this. You have to see it, the older Alina said. Because now that you're here, these possibilities are more real than they were before. The mirror maze doesn't just show you alternate lives. It makes them more likely to happen. I opened my eyes and saw something that made me scream. In one of the mirrors, I was lying in a hospital bed, hooked up to machines, with Mike and my kids crying beside me. I looked like I was dying. That's if you keep coming back here, the older Elena said. The maze feeds on curiosity, on the desire to see what might be. Every time you visit, it takes a little piece of your soul and uses it to make the other possibilities more real. How do I get out of here? Choose, she said. Choose which life you want and walk toward that mirror. But choose carefully, because once you choose, you can't change your mind. I looked around at all the different versions of my life reflected in the mirrors. The successful businesswoman, the doctor, the divorced woman crying alone, the dying woman in the hospital bed. So many possibilities, so many different paths. But then I remembered something. Mike's laugh when he told a bad joke. The way my daughter hugged me when she had a nightmare. The smell of my son's hair when I kissed him goodnight. I didn't want a different life. I wanted my life. I choose to go home, I said out loud. That's not how it works, the older Alina said. You have to choose one of the reflections. Then I choose this one, I said, walking toward the mirror that showed me as I really was. Not older, not younger, not different in any way. Just me, Elena Kowalski, accountant and mother and wife. The moment I touched the mirror, everything went white. I woke up in the parking lot outside the abandoned mall. With Amy shaking my shoulder. Elena, wake up. What happened? You just collapsed. I sat up slowly, my head pounding. How long was I out? Maybe 5 minutes. We were walking toward the House of Mirrors, and you just fell over. I think you fainted. I looked around. The carnival was still there, still operating, but the House of Mirrors was gone. Where it had been, there was just an empty storefront with newspaper taped over the windows. Amy, there was a House of Mirrors right there, I said, pointing. She looked confused. Alana, there's no House of Mirrors. There never was. Are you feeling okay? I let her drive me home, and I spent the rest of the weekend thinking about what had happened. Had it been a dream, a hallucination, some kind of breakdown brought on by stress? But on Monday morning, when I got to work, my boss called me into his office. He offered me a promotion that would mean more money, but also more travel, more time away from my family. The exact kind of opportunity that might lead to the affair I'd seen in the mirrors. I turned it down. 2 weeks later, Mike suggested we take a vacation to Hawaii. Normally, I would have worried about the expense, about taking time off work. But I remembered the version of myself dying in the hospital bed, and I said yes. We had the best vacation of our lives. I never saw that carnival again, and I never told anyone about what happened in the House of Mirrors. But sometimes, when I'm making a decision about something important, I think about all those different versions of myself I saw, and I try to choose the path that leads to the life I already have, the life I chose when I touched that final mirror. Because I learned something that night. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes the life you have is the life you're supposed to live, and all you have to do is appreciate it. But I also learned something else. There are places in this world where reality is thinner than we think, where possibilities bleed through from other dimensions or other timelines. And sometimes, if you're not careful, you can get lost in those places. I drive past that abandoned mall sometimes, on my way to the grocery store or to pick up the kids from school. The storefront where the House of Mirrors was is still empty, still has newspaper taped over the windows. But sometimes, late at night, when the light hits it just right, I swear I can see my reflection staring back at me from behind the glass. Story 4. The Balloon Man. This is going to sound completely insane, but I swear on my grandmother's grave that every word is true. I'm Jacob Mueller, I'm 23, and I live in a little town called New Braunfels in Texas. You probably never heard of it, but it's about halfway between Austin and San Antonio, right on the Guadalupe River. I work at the tire shop downtown. Been there since I graduated high school. It's not glamorous work, but it pays decent, and my boss is cool about letting me have weekends off. Which is important because I play guitar in a band called Broken Axle. We're not famous or anything, just play local bars and the occasional festival. This whole thing started last September during Wurstfest, which is basically our town's version of Oktoberfest. It's a big deal around here, brings in thousands of tourists every year. There's German food, German beer, polka music, and all kinds of carnival rides and games set up in Landa Park. I was there with my girlfriend Stephanie and some friends, just hanging out and drinking beer. We'd been there for a few hours and were pretty buzzed when Stephanie noticed this guy selling balloons near the kiddie rides. "That's weird," she said, pointing him out. "Look at his balloons." I looked over and saw what she meant. This dude had maybe 50 or 60 balloons tied to a cart, but they weren't normal balloon colors. Instead of red, blue, yellow, green, they were all these strange shades I'd never seen before. Like a purple that was almost black, or a blue that seemed to glow in the dark, or a green that looked like it was moving and shifting. The balloon man himself was pretty ordinary looking, middle-aged, average height, wearing jeans and a plaid shirt. But there was something about the way he stood there, perfectly still, that was kind of unsettling. He wasn't calling out to customers or trying to get people's attention like the other vendors. He was just standing there waiting. "Let's go check it out," I said, because I was drunk enough to think it was a good idea. We walked over to the balloon cart and the man smiled at us. But it was one of those smiles that doesn't reach the eyes, you know. Like he was going through the motions of being friendly, but didn't really mean it. "Good evening," he said in this soft, calm voice. "Looking for something special tonight?" "Just balloons, man," I said. "What's with the weird colors?" "These aren't ordinary balloons," he replied. "Each one is filled with a different kind of gas. When you let them go, they don't just float away. They take something with them." Stephanie laughed. "Take what with them?" "Depends on which balloon you choose. Some take away bad memories. Some take away fears. Some take away regrets." My friend Chris, who was pretty wasted at this point, thought this was hilarious. "Dude, that's the best sales pitch ever. I'll take one that removes my regret about dropping out of college." The balloon man studied Chris for a moment, then selected a balloon that was this weird orange color, almost like rust. "This one should work for you," he said, handing it over. $5. Chris paid him and immediately let the balloon go. We all watched it rise up into the night sky until we couldn't see it anymore. "So how long before my regret goes away?" Chris asked. "Give it a few minutes," the balloon man said. Stephanie wanted one too, so she picked a pale yellow balloon that the man said would take away her anxiety about starting nursing school. I was skeptical about the whole thing, but I figured what the hell. I picked a dark blue balloon that he said would remove my fear of performing on stage. We all let our balloons go and watched them disappear into the darkness. Then we went back to drinking and listening to the polka band. About an hour later, Chris started acting different. He was usually pretty quiet and self-conscious, especially when he'd been drinking. But suddenly he was the life of the party, telling jokes and talking to strangers like he'd known them his whole life. "I feel great," he kept saying. "I feel like I could do anything." Stephanie noticed a change too. She'd been stressed about nursing school for months, barely sleeping, constantly worrying about whether she was smart enough or tough enough to handle it. But that night, she seemed completely relaxed and confident. "It's like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders," she told me. "I know I'm going to do great in school." As for me, I didn't notice anything different until the next weekend when our band had a gig at Groon Hall. Normally I get pretty nervous before we go on stage, especially at a venue as famous as Groon Hall. But that night I felt completely calm and confident. I played better than I ever had before. At first, we all thought it was just coincidence. Maybe we were just having good nights, or maybe the beer had relaxed us more than usual. But as the weeks went by, the changes stuck. Chris started taking college classes again, something he'd been too ashamed to do for the past 3 years. Stephanie aced all her nursing school entrance exams, and I started booking more gigs for the band, even reaching out to venues in Austin and Houston that I'd been too scared to contact before. It seemed like the balloon man had actually done what he promised. We'd bought balloons that took away our problems, and they'd worked. But then things started getting weird. About 2 months after Wurstfest, Chris called me in the middle of the night. He sounded panicked. "Jacob, I think I made a mistake," he said. "I can't remember why I dropped out of college in the first place." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I literally can't remember. I know I dropped out, but I can't remember the reason. It's like that part of my memory has been erased." I told him he was probably just overthinking things, but a few days later Stephanie called with a similar problem. "I can't remember what I used to be anxious about," she said. "I know I was worried about nursing school, but I can't remember any of the specific fears I had. It's like they never existed. That's when I started paying attention to my own memory, and I realized the same thing had happened to me. I knew I used to get stage fright, but I couldn't remember what it felt like. The fear was completely gone, but so was the memory of ever having it. We tried to contact the balloon man, but Wurstfest was over and all the carnival vendors had moved on to other towns. We asked around, but nobody seemed to remember him except us. Things got worse over the next few months. Chris became almost manic in his enthusiasm for school, taking way too many classes and barely sleeping. He'd lost the ability to feel regret about anything, which meant he couldn't learn from his mistakes. Stephanie threw herself into nursing school with an intensity that was scary to watch. She stopped hanging out with friends, stopped doing anything fun, because she couldn't feel anxiety about anything. Without that normal level of worry, she couldn't tell when she was pushing herself too hard. And me, I started taking bigger and bigger risks with the band. I booked us gigs we weren't ready for, signed contracts without reading them, spent money we didn't have on equipment. Without fear to hold me back, I was making reckless decisions. The worst part was that we couldn't make ourselves care about the consequences. The balloon man hadn't just taken away our negative emotions, he'd taken away our ability to feel them at all. And those emotions, it turned out, served important purposes. Fear keeps you from doing dangerous things. Anxiety makes you prepare and study harder. Regret helps you learn from your mistakes and avoid repeating them. By last spring, all three of our lives were falling apart. Chris had flunked out of college again because he was taking on too much. Stephanie had a nervous breakdown and had to take a leave of absence from nursing school. And I'd gotten the band into serious debt by booking a tour we couldn't afford. That's when we decided we had to find the balloon man and somehow get our emotions back. We spent weeks researching traveling carnivals and festivals, trying to track down where he might be. Finally, we found him at a small county fair about 2 hours away in a town called Comfort. He was set up in the same spot, with the same cart full of strange colored balloons. When he saw us approaching, he smiled that same cold smile. "Well, well," he said, "how did my customers enjoy their purchases?" "We want them back," Chris said. "Our regrets, our fears, our anxiety. We want them back." The balloon man laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I'm afraid that's not how it works. What's taken away can't be returned." "You didn't tell us it would erase our memories too," Stephanie said. "You didn't tell us we'd lose the ability to feel those emotions at all." "I told you the balloons would take something away," he replied. "I never said it would be temporary or reversible." "What are you?" I asked. "You're not just some carnival vendor." His smile faded, and for a moment I saw something else in his face, something ancient and hungry. "I'm a collector," he said. "I collect human experiences, human emotions. Fear, regret, anxiety, they're all very valuable where I come from, and humans are so eager to give them away." "Where you come from?" Stephanie asked. "Somewhere else. Somewhere between the spaces in your world. We've been harvesting human emotions for centuries, trading them like currency." "Give them back," Chris demanded. "I can't. They've already been processed, packaged, and shipped. But I can offer you a trade." He gestured to his balloons. "I have balloons that can give you new emotions. Artificial ones, but they'll serve the same purpose." "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch. Just another $5 each." We looked at each other. We were desperate enough to try anything. "What emotions do you have?" Stephanie asked. "Caution instead of fear. Concern instead of anxiety. Wisdom instead of regret. They're not exactly the same as what you lost, but they'll help you make better decisions." We each bought another balloon. This time they were different colors, more muted and subtle than the first ones. We let them go and watched them disappear into the afternoon sky. The artificial emotions kicked in within a few hours. They weren't the same as what we'd lost, but they were close enough. I started being more careful about the band's finances. Stephanie began studying at a more reasonable pace. Chris learned to balance his course load. But there was something hollow about these new emotions. They felt fake, manufactured, like we were wearing masks instead of feeling real feelings. And sometimes, late at night, I can feel the absence of what was taken from me. There's a hole in my psyche where my natural fear used to be, and no artificial emotion can completely fill it. I still see the balloon man sometimes, at different festivals and fairs around Texas. He's always there with his cart of strange colored balloons, always ready to take away whatever's troubling you. But I've learned my lesson. Some emotions are meant to be felt, even the unpleasant ones. They're part of what makes us human, part of what keeps us safe and helps us grow. The balloon man is still out there, still collecting human experiences and selling them to whoever's buying. and people are still eager to give away their pain, their fear, their regret. But they don't realize what they're losing until it's too late. If you ever see a balloon vendor with unusual colored balloons, my advice is to walk away. Keep your fears, keep your regrets, keep your anxiety. They're yours for a reason, and you're going to need them more than you know. Story 5. The Puppet Show. I don't usually talk about this, but my therapist says writing it down might help. My name is Ingrid Larson, I'm 42 years old, and I work as a librarian in Duluth, Minnesota. I've lived here my whole life, through winters that would make a polar bear complain and summers that are gone before you know they started. This happened 5 years ago, in the summer of 2019. My daughter Emma was 12 at the time, and she was going through that phase where she thought everything her mother did was embarrassing. But she still liked carnivals, so when the Northern Minnesota State Fair came to town, I convinced her to go with me. It was a Saturday afternoon in July, one of those perfect summer days we get maybe 10 of each year. Warm but not hot, sunny with a light breeze off Lake Superior. Emma had agreed to come, but only if I promised not to act like a mom in front of anyone she might know from school. We spent the first couple hours doing the usual fair activities. Emma rode the tilt-a-whirl with some friends she ran into. I bought us both funnel cakes. We watched the pig races. Normal stuff. But around 4 o'clock, Emma spotted something that caught her interest. "Mom, look at that," she said, pointing toward a small tent set up between the ring toss game and the corn dog stand. The tent was striped red and white, with a hand-painted sign that read Professor Marionetti's Marvelous Puppet Theater. There was a small crowd gathered around the entrance, mostly families with younger children. "It's probably for little kids," I said, but Emma was already walking toward it. "I want to see it," she said. "I used to love puppet shows when I was little." I followed her over to the tent. The entrance was blocked by a red velvet curtain, and standing beside it was a man who must have been Professor Marionetti himself. He was probably in his 60s, with a neat white beard, and wearing an old-fashioned black suit with a red vest. He looked like he'd stepped out of a Victorian photograph. "Welcome, welcome," he said in a voice that carried a slight accent I couldn't place. "The next show begins in 5 minutes. Only $3 per person to witness wonders beyond imagination." Emma was already digging in her purse for money, so I paid for both of us. Professor Marionetti smiled and lifted the curtain, gesturing for us to enter. Inside the tent, there were maybe 20 folding chairs arranged in front of a small stage. The stage was enclosed by dark blue curtains, with footlights along the front edge. It looked professional, not like the cheap carnival attractions I was used to. We found seats in the 3rd row, and I looked around at the other audience members. Mostly parents with kids between the ages of 5 and 10, plus a few teenagers like Emma who were probably there more out of nostalgia than genuine interest. The lights dimmed and Professor Marionetti appeared on stage. Up close, I could see that his suit was made of expensive-looking fabric, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine. This wasn't some fly-by-night carnival performer. This was someone who took his craft seriously. "Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls," he began, "welcome to a world where the impossible becomes possible, where the inanimate comes to life, where strings can bind more than just wood and cloth." The curtains opened to reveal a miniature stage within the stage, complete with tiny painted backdrops and furniture. And then the puppets appeared. I've seen a lot of puppet shows over the years, mostly at the library where we do children's programming. But these were different. The puppets were incredibly detailed, with faces that looked almost human. Their movements were so smooth and natural that it was easy to forget they were being controlled by strings. The first act was a simple story about a little girl puppet who got lost in the woods and had to find her way home. But as the story progressed, I started to notice things that made me uncomfortable. The little girl puppet's face seemed to change expressions in ways that went beyond what the puppeteer could control. When she was scared, she really looked scared. When she was sad, tears seemed to glisten in her painted eyes. And the forest around her seemed to move and breathe like it was alive. The trees swayed without any visible strings, and shadows moved across the backdrop in patterns that didn't match the stage lighting. I glanced at Emma to see if she was noticing the same things, but she was completely absorbed in the performance. Her eyes were wide and unblinking, and she was leaning forward in her seat like she was trying to get closer to the stage. The second act featured a puppet that looked like a young man, maybe in his 20s. He was searching for something, wandering through different scenes that changed around him without any visible stage hands moving the backdrops. This puppet's face was even more expressive than the little girl's had been. I could see emotions playing across his features, subtle changes in his expression that seemed impossible for a wooden puppet controlled by strings. But the strangest thing was that he looked familiar. I couldn't place where I'd seen that face before, but something about him reminded me of someone I knew. During the third act, I figured it out. The puppet looked like David Korhonen, a boy who had disappeared from Duluth when I was in high school. He'd been 17, a senior at East High School, and one day he just vanished. His car was found in the parking lot at Canal Park, but there was no sign of what had happened to him. I remembered the story because it had been big news at the time, and because David had been in my chemistry class. He was quiet, artistic, the kind of kid who kept to himself but was always polite when you talked to him. The puppet on stage had David's dark hair, his thin face, even the way he held his shoulders when he walked. It was impossible, but I was sure it was supposed to be him. As I watched, the David puppet seemed to notice me in the audience. His painted eyes turned toward me, and his wooden face formed an expression of recognition. Then he began to mouth words, moving his lips without making any sound. I'm good at reading lips, a skill I developed working with hearing-impaired patrons at the library. The puppet was saying, "Help me. Please help me." I felt a chill run down my spine and looked around to see if anyone else was seeing this. But the other audience members were all watching normally, smiling and clapping at appropriate moments. When I looked back at the stage, the David puppet was gone, replaced by a different character entirely. The show continued for another 20 minutes, with various puppets acting out different scenarios. But I wasn't really paying attention anymore. I kept thinking about David Korhonen and wondering if I was losing my mind. When the performance ended, the audience applauded enthusiastically. Professor Marionetti took a bow and announced that there would be another show in 2 hours. As people filed out of the tent, I lingered behind, pretending to look for something in my purse. I wanted to talk to Professor Marionetti, to ask him about the puppet that looked like David. "Excuse me," I said when the tent was mostly empty. "That was a wonderful show. I was wondering about one of your puppets." The young man in the third act, he looked familiar. Professor Marionetti's eyes sharpened, and he studied my face carefully. Familiar how? He reminded me of someone I went to school with, a boy named David Korhonen. The professor's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. "I'm afraid I don't know that name. My puppets are all original creations." But the resemblance was so strong. "Perhaps you're seeing what you want to see," he said, but his tone was dismissive now. The mind often plays tricks on us, especially when we're looking at art. I could tell he wasn't going to give me any more information, so I thanked him and left the tent. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. That evening, after Emma went to bed, I got on my computer and started researching. I looked up everything I could find about David Korhonen's disappearance, reading old newspaper articles and police reports that were available online. What I found made my blood run cold. David hadn't been the only young person to disappear from Duluth over the years. There had been others, going back decades. Always teenagers or young adults, always artistic types, always vanishing without a trace. And in several of the cases, witnesses reported seeing the missing person at local fairs or carnivals shortly before they disappeared. I stayed up most of the night reading, and by morning I had convinced myself that I needed to go back to that puppet show. If there was even a chance that David and the others were somehow trapped as puppets, I had to do something about it. The next day was Sunday, the last day of the fair. I dropped Emma off at her friend's house and drove back to the fairgrounds alone. Professor Marionetti's tent was still there, and according to the schedule posted outside, there was a show starting in 15 minutes. I bought a ticket and went inside. This time, there were only about 10 people in the audience, mostly adults without children. I sat in the front row and waited for the show to begin. The performance was different from the one I'd seen the day before. The puppets were the same, but the stories were darker, more complex. And I was sure now that several of them were meant to represent missing people from Duluth. There was a puppet that looked like Sarah Hendricks, a college student who had disappeared in 2003. Another that resembled Marcus Webb, a high school student who had vanished in 1995. And there was David again, in a longer scene this time. He was trapped in what looked like a prison cell, reaching through the bars and mouthing words I couldn't make out from my position in the front row. After the show, I waited until everyone else had left, then approached Professor Marionetti. "I know what you're doing," I said quietly. "I know who those puppets really are." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Do you? And what exactly do you think you know, Miss Larson?" The fact that he knew my name, even though I hadn't told him, confirmed my suspicions. You're taking people? I said. Young people with artistic talent. And somehow you're trapping their souls in those puppets. Trapping is such an ugly word, he replied. I prefer to think of it as preserving. These young people were going nowhere with their lives. Now they get to be part of something beautiful, something that brings joy to audiences around the world. They're prisoners. They're artists, finally achieving their full potential. Do you know how long it takes to create a puppet that can move and express emotion the way mine do? It's not about strings and wooden joints, Miss Larson. It's about capturing the essence of a living soul and binding it to a physical form. I felt sick. How long have you been doing this? Centuries. I've been perfecting my craft for longer than you can imagine, and I'm always looking for new talent. That's when I realized I'd made a terrible mistake. I was alone in the tent with a man who had been kidnapping people for centuries, and no one knew where I was. Don't worry, Professor Marionetti said, as if reading my thoughts. You're too old for my purposes. I prefer subjects between the ages of 15 and 25. Their souls are more malleable. What about Emma? I asked, suddenly terrified for my daughter. Your daughter has potential, he said thoughtfully. But she's still a bit young. Perhaps in a few years, when she's ready to make art instead of just consuming it. I backed toward the tent entrance, but found my way blocked by two of his puppets. They had somehow gotten down from the stage and were standing upright without strings, their painted eyes fixed on me. I can't let you leave with this knowledge, Professor Marionetti said. But I won't harm you, as long as you promise to keep quiet about what you've learned. And if I don't promise, then you'll join my collection after all. Age is less important than discretion. I looked at the puppets blocking my way, then back at Professor Marionetti. I thought about David Korhonen and all the other missing young people, trapped forever in wooden bodies. I promise. I lied. He studied my face for a long moment, then nodded. The puppets stepped aside, and I walked quickly out of the tent. I went straight to the police station and told them everything. The detective I spoke with was polite but skeptical. He took my statement and said they'd look into it, but I could tell he thought I was crazy. By the time they got around to checking on Professor Marionetti, the fair had packed up and moved on. I tried to track down the Carnival company, but it was like they'd never existed. No permits, no business licenses, no record of them anywhere. For months afterward, I had nightmares about those puppets. I dreamed that Emma was on stage, trapped in a wooden body, mouthing words I couldn't understand. I became obsessive about keeping track of where Emma was at all times. I made her promise to never go to carnivals or fairs without me, and I monitored every art program she wanted to join. She thought I was being overprotective, and maybe I was. But I couldn't risk losing her to Professor Marionetti's collection. It's been 5 years now, and I've never seen or heard from him again. Emma is 17 now, applying to colleges, planning to major in art history. Every time she mentions wanting to study abroad or attend some special program, I panic a little. Because I know he's still out there somewhere, traveling from town to town with his puppet show. Still looking for talented young people to add to his collection. And I know that someday he might come back for Emma. Story 6. The Ring Toss. Look, I know how this is going to sound, but I'm telling you exactly what happened. My name's Bartholomew Chen, though everyone just calls me Bart. I'm 56 years old, and I've been a long-haul trucker for the past 32 years. I've driven through every state in the continental U.S., seen things that would make your hair stand on end, and I don't scare easy. This happened about 8 months ago, in February of 2023. I was hauling a load of electronics from Los Angeles to Atlanta, taking my usual route through Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and Louisiana. It was a Tuesday night, and I was somewhere outside of Roswell, New Mexico, looking for a place to park and get some sleep. Now, I know what you're thinking. Roswell aliens, very funny. But this isn't some joke about little green men and flying saucers. This is about something a lot stranger and a lot more personal. I'd been driving for about 10 hours and was starting to feel that bone-deep fatigue that comes with pushing yourself too hard. My eyes were burning, my back was atching, and I knew I needed to pull over before I became a danger to myself and everyone else on the road. The problem was finding a good spot. This stretch of highway doesn't have a lot of truck stops, and the few rest areas are usually full up by the time evening rolls around. I was starting to think I might have to park on the shoulder when I saw lights up ahead. At first, I thought it might be another truck stop, but as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. There was a small carnival set up in what looked like an abandoned gas station parking lot. Just a few rides, some game booths, and a handful of food trucks. Nothing fancy, but the lights were bright enough to see by. I pulled into the parking lot and found a spot where I could park my rig without blocking anyone. The carnival was still operating, even though it was past 10 o'clock on a weeknight. There were maybe 20 or 30 people walking around, mostly adults, which struck me as odd. Usually these traveling carnivals are family affairs, but I didn't see any kids. I climbed down from my cab and stretched my legs, thinking I might grab a cup of coffee and maybe a hot dog before settling in for the night. The air was cold and dry, typical for New Mexico in February, and the wind was making those little dust devils that dance across the desert. The first thing I noticed was how quiet everything was. Oh, there was music playing from the rides and the usual carnival sounds, but the people weren't making much noise. They moved around like they were sleepwalking, not talking to each other, not laughing or shouting like you'd expect. I walked over to a coffee stand and ordered a large black coffee from a woman who looked like she was in her 40s. She had dark hair and tired eyes, and when she handed me the cup, I noticed her hands were shaking slightly. "You okay, miss?" I asked. She looked at me like she was surprised to hear someone talking to her. "I'm fine," she said, but her voice was flat, emotionless. "Busy night for a Tuesday," I said, trying to make conversation. "Is it Tuesday?" she asked, and she sounded genuinely confused. Before I could respond, she turned away and started cleaning the coffee machine, even though it looked perfectly clean already. I got the feeling she didn't want to talk anymore, so I took my coffee and walked away. The whole place had that same weird vibe. People going through the motions of having fun, but without any actual joy or enthusiasm. I watched a man in his 30s ride the carousel by himself, going around and around with a blank expression on his face. A woman was playing the duck pond game, but she wasn't trying to win anything. She just kept picking up the rubber ducks and putting them back down. That's when I noticed the ring toss booth. It was set up near the back of the carnival, kind of isolated from the other games. The booth itself looked normal enough, with rows of bottles arranged on shelves and a pile of plastic rings on the counter. But the man running it was different from the other carnival workers. He was tall, maybe 6'4", and thin as a rail. He had pale skin and black hair that looked like it had been slicked back with oil. But the strangest thing about him was his eyes. They were completely black, no whites visible at all. He was watching me as I approached, and when I got close enough, he smiled. His teeth were perfectly white and perfectly straight, but somehow that made his smile even more unsettling. "Good evening, friend," he said in a voice that was too smooth, too polished. "Care to try your luck at the ring toss?" "How much?" I asked, even though I wasn't really interested in playing. "No charge for truckers," he said. Professional courtesy. That should have been my first warning sign. Nobody gives away free games at a carnival, especially not to random strangers. But I was tired and curious, so I picked up one of the plastic rings. "What do I win if I make it?" I asked. He gestured to a shelf behind him that I hadn't noticed before. It was filled with what looked like snow globes, each one about the size of a softball. But instead of winter scenes or famous landmarks, these globes contained what looked like miniature landscapes. Tiny deserts, forests, cities, all incredibly detailed. "Choose your prize first," he said, "then try to win it." I looked at the snow globes more carefully. One contained a perfect replica of a truck stop, complete with big rigs parked outside and tiny people walking around. Another showed a small town with a main street lined with shops and houses. A third contained what looked like a beach scene, with palm trees and a pier extending into blue water. But there was one that caught my attention. It showed a landscape that looked familiar, though I couldn't place where I'd seen it before. Rolling hills covered with green grass, a small farmhouse in the distance, and a dirt road winding through the scene. "That one," I said, pointing to it. The man with the black eyes reached up and took the globe from the shelf. Up close, I could see that the detail was incredible. The grass seemed to move in a breeze that didn't exist, and smoke was rising from the chimney of the tiny farmhouse. "A fine choice," he said. "This represents a place of peace and contentment, a place where you can rest without worry, where time moves slowly and troubles fade away." He set the globe on the counter in front of me. "3 rings," he said. "You need to get at least one on a bottle to win." I picked up the first ring and aimed at the nearest bottle. The throw felt good, and the ring sailed straight toward its target. But just as it was about to land on the bottle, it seemed to veer slightly to the left and clattered to the floor. "Close," the man said. "Try again." My second throw was even closer, but again the ring seemed to change direction at the last second, missing the bottle by inches. "One more," he said, and there was something in his voice that made me look at him more carefully. He was leaning forward slightly, and his black eyes were fixed on the snow globe, As I watched, the scene inside seemed to shift and change. The farmhouse grew larger, more detailed, and I could swear I saw a tiny figure standing in the doorway. I threw the third ring, and this time it landed perfectly on the center bottle. "Congratulations," the man said, but he didn't sound pleased. He sounded almost disappointed. "You've won your prize." He handed me the snow globe, and the moment my fingers touched it, I felt a strange tingling sensation. The globe was warm, warmer than it should have been, and it seemed to pulse gently in my hands. "What exactly is this?" I asked. "A doorway," he said simply. "When you're ready to leave this world behind, just hold the globe and think about the place inside. You'll find yourself there, where nothing can hurt you and nothing can worry you ever again." I looked down at the globe. The tiny farmhouse looked so peaceful, so inviting. For a moment, I could almost imagine myself walking up that dirt road, opening the door and settling down in front of a warm fireplace. "How does it work?" I asked, but when I looked up, the man was gone. Not just gone from behind the counter, but completely vanished. The ring toss booth was still there, but it looked abandoned, like it hadn't been used in years. The bottles were covered with dust, and the rings were scattered on the ground. I looked around for the man with the black eyes, but he was nowhere to be seen. In fact, the whole carnival seemed different now. The lights were dimmer, the music was distorted and slow, and most of the people had disappeared. I walked back toward my truck, clutching the snow globe and trying to make sense of what had just happened. The coffee stand where I'd bought my drink was closed up tight, with no sign of the woman who had served me. By the time I reached my rig, the carnival was completely dark and silent. I looked back at where it had been, and all I could see were the outlines of abandoned rides and empty booths. I climbed into my cab and tried to convince myself that I'd been more tired than I thought, that I'd imagined the whole thing. But the snow globe was still in my hands, still warm and pulsing gently. I set it on my dashboard and tried to get some sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I could see that tiny farmhouse calling to me. Over the next few weeks, I found myself looking at the globe more and more often. The scene inside never changed, but it seemed to become more detailed each time I looked at it. I could see curtains in the windows of the farmhouse, flowers growing in the garden, even what looked like a dog sleeping on the front porch. And the more I looked at it, the more I wanted to be there. My job started to feel meaningless. Driving the same routes, delivering the same loads, staying in the same truck stops night after night. What was the point of it all? Wouldn't it be better to just give up this life and go somewhere peaceful? The globe started calling to me at night. I'd wake up to find it glowing softly on my dashboard, and I'd have to fight the urge to pick it up and think about that farmhouse. 3 months after I won the globe, I was hauling a load through Kansas when I finally gave in to temptation. I was parked at a rest stop outside of Salina, feeling lonelier than I'd felt in years. My ex-wife had called that morning to tell me she was getting remarried. My daughter hadn't returned my calls in weeks, and I was facing another night alone in my cab. I picked up the snow globe and stared at the farmhouse. It looked so welcoming, so warm and safe. Before I knew what I was doing, I was thinking about walking up that dirt road, opening the door, and leaving all my troubles behind. The world around me started to fade. I felt myself shrinking, or maybe the globe was growing. Either way, I found myself standing on that dirt road, looking up at the farmhouse. It was exactly as it had appeared in the globe, down to the smallest detail. The air smelled like fresh grass and wildflowers. The sun was warm on my face, and there was a gentle breeze that made the leaves rustle softly. It was the most peaceful place I'd ever been. I walked up to the farmhouse and knocked on the door. It opened to reveal a woman in her 60s with gray hair and kind eyes. She smiled at me like she'd been expecting me. "Welcome home, Bartholomew," she said. "We've been waiting for you." When? She stepped aside, and I could see into the house. There were other people inside, maybe a dozen of them, all sitting around a large wooden table. They looked up at me and smiled, and I recognized some of their faces from missing person reports I'd seen on the news over the years. "Come in," the woman said. "You don't have to drive anymore. You don't have to worry about anything anymore. You can just rest." I stepped toward the door, but something made me hesitate. Maybe it was the way the people inside weren't moving, just sitting there with those fixed smiles. Maybe it was the fact that their eyes looked empty, like nobody was home behind them. "What happens if I come inside?" I asked. "You'll be at peace," she said. "Forever and always." "And if I don't?" Her smile faltered slightly. "Why wouldn't you want peace?" I thought about my life. Yeah, it was hard sometimes. Yeah, I was lonely and tired and getting old. But it was my life. My choices, my mistakes, my small victories and daily struggles. Because peace isn't living, I said. It's just existing. I turned around and started walking back down the dirt road. Behind me, I could hear the woman calling my name, begging me to come back. But I kept walking until I reached the edge of the scene. The world started to grow around me, or maybe I started to shrink back to normal size. Either way, I found myself sitting in my truck cab, holding the snow globe. But something had changed. The scene inside was different now. Instead of the peaceful farmhouse, it showed a truck stop. My truck was parked outside, and I could see a tiny figure that looked like me walking toward the building. I realized that the globe hadn't been showing me an escape from my life. It had been showing me my life, trying to trap me in a perfect moment that would never change, never grow, never become anything more than it was. I rolled down my window and threw the globe as hard as I could. It shattered against a concrete barrier, and for a moment I could swear I heard voices crying out as the pieces scattered in the wind. I've been back to that spot outside of Roswell several times since then, but there's never been any sign of a carnival. Just an abandoned gas station and an empty parking lot. But sometimes, when I'm driving late at night through the desert, I see lights in the distance that look like carnival rides, and I always take a different route, because I know that somewhere out there, that man with the black eyes is still running his ring toss game, still offering people a chance to win their perfect world, still collecting souls in snow globes. Story 7. The Fortune Teller. I suppose I should start by saying that I never believed in any of this nonsense before it happened to me. Fortune tellers, psychics, crystal balls, all of it seemed like complete rubbish designed to separate gullible people from their money. I'm a practical woman, always have been. 47 years old, divorced, working as an insurance adjuster in Manchester, England. I deal in facts and evidence, not fairy tales and superstition. But sometimes the world has a way of forcing you to reconsider your assumptions. This was back in August of 2022. I was visiting my sister Penelope in Brighton for a long weekend, trying to get away from work and the general dreariness of my life. Penny had been after me for months to come down for a visit, said I needed to get out more, meet new people, have some fun. Brighton in August is absolutely mad, of course. Tourists everywhere, the beaches packed, queues for everything. But Penny insisted we go to the pier on Saturday evening, said there was supposed to be some sort of special carnival that had just arrived in town. The Brighton Palace Pier is usually crowded enough with the regular attractions, but that night it was absolutely heaving. The carnival had set up additional rides and games along the length of the pier, creating a proper festival atmosphere. There were fairy lights strung everywhere, the smell of fish and chips and candy floss in the air, and that particular mix of excitement and chaos that comes with British seaside entertainment. Penny was in her element, of course. She's always been the adventurous one, 5 years younger than me and still acting like she's 20. She wanted to ride every ride, play every game, eat every bit of junk food on offer. I was content to follow along and watch, nursing a pint of bitter and trying not to think about the expense reports waiting for me back in Manchester. But as we made our way down the pier, something caught my eye. There was a small booth wedged between the hook-a-duck game and the candy floss stand, almost hidden in the shadows. It was painted dark blue with silver stars, and a sign above the entrance read Madame Zelda Fortunes Told, Futures Revealed. "Oh, let's have a go," Penny said, spotting it at the same time I did. "It'll be a laugh, don't be ridiculous," I replied. "It's just some old fraud in a costume taking money from tourists." But Penny was already walking toward the booth, and I had no choice but to follow her. The woman sitting inside was not what I expected. I'd imagined some theatrical gypsy type with bangles and scarves, but Madame Zelda appeared to be in her 70s, with silver hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing an ordinary blue cardigan. She looked more like someone's grandmother than a fortune teller. "Good evening, ladies," she said in an accent that was clearly local, not the fake Eastern European nonsense I'd anticipated. "Would you like to know what the future holds?" "Yes, please," Penny said eagerly. "How much?" £20 for a full reading, Madame Zelda replied. "But I should warn you, I don't tell people what they want to hear. I tell them what they need to know." Penny paid without hesitation and sat down across from the old woman. I stood behind her, arms crossed, ready to be thoroughly unimpressed. Madame Zelda took Penny's hands and studied her palms for a moment, then looked up into her eyes. "You're going to meet someone very soon," she said. "Someone who will change your life completely. But you'll have to choose between your old life and your new one, and the choice will be harder than you think." "Oh, how exciting," Penny said. "When will this happen?" "Within the month." "And you?" Madame Zelda turned her attention to me. "You don't believe a word of this." You're quite right, I said. It's all cold reading and lucky guesses. She smiled, and there was something in her expression that made me uncomfortable. Would you like me to prove you wrong? I beg your pardon? Sit down. Let me read your future. If I'm just making lucky guesses, you'll know it immediately. I should have walked away. Every rational part of my brain was telling me this was a waste of time and money, but there was something about her confidence that intrigued me. Fine, I said, sitting down and placing my hands on the small table between us. But I'm not paying £20 to be told I'm going to meet a tall, dark stranger. Madame Zelda took my hands in hers, and immediately I felt something strange. Her skin was warm, almost hot, and there was a tingling sensation where she touched me. She stared at my palms for a long time, longer than she had with Penny. Her expression grew more serious, more concerned. "This is unusual," she murmured. "What's unusual?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "Your lifeline. It's..." Interrupted. "What does that mean?" She looked up at me, and I saw something in her eyes that looked like genuine worry. "It means your life is going to take a very dramatic turn. Soon, within days, not weeks." "What kind of turn?" "I'm not entirely sure. The lines are unclear. But I can see that you're going to have to make a choice that will determine not just your future, but whether you have a future at all." I pulled my hands away from hers. "That's rather dramatic, isn't it? Are you trying to frighten me into paying for some sort of protection charm?" "I don't sell charms," she said quietly. "And I wish I could tell you something different. But I've been reading palms for 50 years, and I've never seen anything quite like this." "Like what, exactly?" "Your lifeline doesn't just change direction. It stops, and then it starts again, but it's different, fainter, like you die and then come back, but not completely." Penny was looking back and forth between us, clearly uncomfortable with the turn the conversation had taken. "Maybe we should go," she said. But I was strangely fascinated now. "What else do you see?" Madame Zelda hesitated, then reached for my hands again. I let her take them, despite every instinct telling me to leave. "You're going to encounter something that shouldn't exist," she said. "Something that's been waiting for you specifically, and when you do, you'll have to choose between accepting what you see or clinging to what you think you know about the world. And if I choose wrong, then the break in your lifeline becomes permanent." I stood up abruptly. "This is ridiculous. You're just trying to scare me." "I'm trying to warn you," she said, "because in all my years of reading palms, I've only seen this pattern 3 times before, and 2 of those people are dead. What happened to the third? I don't know. She disappeared." I grabbed Penny's arm and pulled her away from the booth. "Come on, we're leaving." As we walked away, I could hear Madame Zelda calling after me. "Be careful, love, and remember, when the time comes, trust what you see, not what you think you know." The rest of the evening was ruined for me. I couldn't enjoy the rides or the games or even the fish and chips we had for dinner. I kept thinking about what the old woman had said, about lifelines that stop and start again, about encountering things that shouldn't exist. Penny tried to cheer me up, said it was all nonsense and that fortune tellers always made dramatic predictions to make their readings seem more important. But I could see she was shaken too. We went back to her flat around 11, and I spent most of the night lying awake thinking about what had happened. By morning, I'd convinced myself that Penny was right. It was all theatrical nonsense designed to make me feel like I'd gotten my money's worth. I took the train back to Manchester on Sunday evening, and by Monday morning I was back to my normal routine. I had a stack of insurance claims to process, including a particularly complex case involving a warehouse fire in Salford. The warehouse belonged to a company called Meridian Imports, and they were claiming that the fire had destroyed several £1,000,000 worth of electronics and textiles. But something about the claim didn't add up. The fire had started in the middle of the night, with no one around to see how it began. The company's financial records showed they'd been struggling for months, and the inventory list seemed suspiciously vague. I decided to visit the site myself, which is something I don't usually do for routine claims. But this one felt different somehow, like there was more to the story than what was in the paperwork. The warehouse was in an industrial area near the Manchester Ship Canal, surrounded by similar buildings and vacant lots. The fire department had done their job well, but the building was clearly a total loss. The roof had collapsed, the walls were blackened with soot, and there was still a lingering smell of smoke and melted plastic. I was walking around the perimeter, taking photos and making notes, when I noticed something odd. There was a section of the building that didn't seem to match the rest of the structure. The bricks were a slightly different color, and the mortar looked newer. I found a gap in the fence and squeezed through to get a closer look. That's when I saw it. There was a door in the newer section of wall, painted the same color as the bricks to make it blend in. It was slightly ajar, and I could see darkness beyond it. Every instinct I had told me to call the police, or at least the fire inspector. This was clearly something that should be investigated by professionals. But I was curious, and curiosity has always been my weakness. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room beyond was undamaged by the fire. It was small, maybe 10 feet by 12 feet, with concrete walls and no windows. There was a single bare bulb hanging from the ceiling, and when I found the light switch, it actually worked. The room was empty except for a metal table in the center and something sitting on top of it. It was a crystal ball. Not a cheap tourist shop crystal ball, but something that looked genuinely old and valuable. It was perfectly clear, about the size of a bowling ball, and it seemed to glow with its own internal light. I approached it slowly, remembering what Madame Zelda had said about encountering things that shouldn't exist. This certainly qualified. What was a crystal ball doing in a hidden room in a burned-out warehouse? As I got closer, I could see that there was something inside the ball. Not an object, but movement. Swirling patterns of light and shadow that seemed to form shapes, then dissolve, then form again. I knew I should leave. Every rational part of my brain was screaming at me to get out of that room and never come back. But I couldn't stop myself from reaching out to touch the crystal ball. The moment my fingers made contact with its surface, the world changed. I was no longer in the warehouse. I was standing in what looked like a vast library, with shelves stretching up into darkness and filled with books that seemed to glow with their own light. The air smelled of old paper and something else, something sweet and cloying. "Welcome, Margaret," a voice said behind me. I turned around and saw a man in an expensive suit, probably in his 40s, with dark hair and eyes that seemed too bright. He was smiling, but there was something predatory about his expression. "Who are you?" I asked. "Where am I?" "You're in a place between places," he said. "A library that exists in the spaces between thoughts, between moments, between heartbeats. And I'm the librarian? That's impossible, is it? You're an insurance investigator, Margaret. You deal with the impossible every day. People who claim their houses burned down by spontaneous combustion. Cars that crash with no explanation. Businesses that fail overnight despite having perfect records. Those things have logical explanations. Do they? Or do you just file them away and collect your fee and try not to think too hard about the inconsistencies?" I looked around at the impossible library, at the books that glowed and whispered, at the shelves that seemed to extend infinitely in all directions. "What do you want with me?" I asked. "I want to offer you a job," he said, "a real job investigating the truly impossible cases, the ones that slip through the cracks of your mundane world." "What kind of cases?" He gestured to the shelves around us. "Every book here represents a case that couldn't be solved by conventional means. Insurance claims that involve genuine supernatural phenomena. Disappearances that can only be explained by interdimensional travel. Deaths that weren't really deaths at all." "You're insane." "Am I?" "Then explain how you got here. Explain the crystal ball. Explain why a fortune teller could read the interruption in your lifeline." I couldn't explain any of those things, and we both knew it. "If I take this job," I said, "what happens to my old life?" "It continues after a fashion. You'll still be Margaret the insurance investigator, but you'll also be Margaret the supernatural investigator. You'll live in both worlds simultaneously." "And if I refuse?" His smile faded. "Then you go back to your old life, and you pretend none of this ever happened. But you'll always know the truth. You'll always wonder about the cases that don't make sense. And eventually, that knowledge will drive you mad." I thought about Madame Zelda's warning, about choosing between what I see and what I think I know. I thought about the lifeline that stops and starts again, but fainter. "How do I know you're telling the truth?" I asked. "You don't, but you know that your old life isn't enough anymore. You've seen too much, learned too much. There's no going back to believing that the world is simple and rational." He was right, and I hated him for it. What exactly would I be investigating? Cases like the one that brought you here? Meridian Imports wasn't just a struggling business. They were smuggling artifacts from other dimensions, selling them to collectors who don't ask questions. The crystal ball was one of their acquisitions, and it didn't want to be sold. The crystal ball burned down the warehouse. The crystal ball defended itself, and now it's chosen you as its new guardian. I looked around at the impossible library, at the books full of impossible stories. If I say yes, do I get to keep being me? You get to become more than you were. But yes, you'll still be you. I closed my eyes and thought about my life in Manchester. My tiny flat, my boring job, my complete lack of friends or family who truly understood me. Then I thought about the alternative he was offering. "All right," I said, "I'll do it." The librarian smiled, and suddenly I was back in the warehouse, standing next to the metal table. But the crystal ball was gone. I looked around the room, confused, and that's when I noticed something in my jacket pocket that hadn't been there before. I pulled it out and found a small crystal sphere, about the size of a marble. As I held it up to the light, I could see tiny swirling patterns inside it, just like the larger ball had contained. I left the warehouse and drove back to my office, where I found a new case file waiting on my desk. A claim from a family in Blackpool whose house had been destroyed by what they claimed was a poltergeist. I opened the file and started reading, and for the first time in years, I felt genuinely excited about my work. That was 8 months ago. Since then, I've investigated dozens of cases that would have seemed impossible to me before. I've met people who can see the future, animals that can talk, objects that move by themselves. And I've learned that the world is far stranger and more wonderful than I ever imagined. The crystal ball in my pocket glows softly when I'm near something supernatural, and sometimes I can see visions in it that help me solve cases. I don't understand how it works, and I've stopped trying to. I never saw Madame Zelda again, though I went back to Brighton several times looking for her booth. But I think she knew what was going to happen to me. I think she was trying to prepare me for it. My lifeline did stop and start again, just like she said it would. The old Margaret died in that warehouse, and a new one was born. One who can see the impossible and accept it as just another part of the job. And I've never been happier. Story 8. The Carousel. My name is Kostas Papadopoulos, and I am 71 years old. I came to America from Greece in 1972, when I was 20 years old, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a head full of dreams. I worked construction for 30 years, saved every penny I could, and eventually opened a small restaurant in Astoria, Queens. The restaurant did well enough to support my family. My wife Maria, God rest her soul, and our 2 children, Dimitri and Sophia. We were not rich people, but we were happy. We had each other, we had our health, and we had our little corner of America. But that is not the story I want to tell you. The story I want to tell you happened 3 years ago, in the summer of 2021, when my granddaughter Elena was visiting from California. Elena was 16 then, a smart girl but troubled. Her parents, my son Dimitri and his wife, were going through a difficult divorce, and Elena was caught in the middle of it. She had been acting out at school, getting into fights, staying out too late. Dimitri thought maybe spending the summer with her grandfather would help her find some peace. I was happy to have her, of course. The restaurant keeps me busy, but not so busy that I cannot spend time with my granddaughter. We would take walks through the neighborhood, visit the museums in Manhattan, sit in the park, and feed the pigeons. Simple pleasures, but important ones. One evening in July, Elena asked if we could go to Luna Park in Coney Island. She had heard about it from some friends she had made in the neighborhood, and she wanted to ride the roller coasters and play the games. I had not been to Coney Island in many years, but I remembered it from when my children were young. It seemed like a good way to spend an evening. We took the subway down to Brooklyn, and I was amazed by how much the area had changed. When I was younger, Coney Island was run down, dangerous, not the kind of place you would bring your family. But now it was clean and bright, full of tourists and families enjoying themselves. Luna Park was crowded, as you would expect on a summer evening. Elena wanted to ride everything, and I was happy to watch her have fun. She rode the Cyclone, the Wonder Wheel, the spinning teacups. I bought her cotton candy and funnel cake, and for a few hours she seemed like a normal teenager again, not the angry, confused girl who had arrived at my apartment 2 weeks earlier. As the evening wore on, the crowds began to thin out. Many of the families with small children were heading home, and the atmosphere became more relaxed. That is when Elena noticed the carousel. It was set up in a corner of the park that I had not seen before, away from the main attractions. The carousel itself was beautiful, clearly an antique, with hand-carved horses and elaborate decorations. But there was something about it that made me uncomfortable, though I could not say exactly what. "Papo, can we ride the carousel?" Elena asked, using the Greek word for grandfather that she had learned from her father. I looked at the carousel more carefully. The horses were indeed beautiful, but they were strange as well. Each one was different, carved with incredible detail and painted in colors that seemed too bright, too vivid. And the music that played was not the cheerful carnival music you would expect, but something slower, more haunting. "I think perhaps we should head home soon," I said. "It is getting late." But Alina was already walking toward the carousel, and I had no choice but to follow her. The man operating the carousel was old, probably older than me, with white hair and deeply lined skin. He was wearing clothes that looked like they belonged to another era, a vest and bow tie that reminded me of photographs from the early 1900s. "Good evening," he said in accented English. I could not place the accent, but it was definitely European. "Would the young lady like to ride?" "Yes, please," Alina said, already reaching for her wallet. "No charge for the last ride of the evening," the old man said. "Choose any horse you like." Alina climbed onto the carousel platform and walked among the horses, examining each one carefully. I watched from the ground, still feeling that strange unease. The horses were even more elaborate up close. One was painted pure white with a golden mane, another was black with silver decorations. There was a red horse with flames painted along its sides, and a blue one that seemed to shimmer like water. Alina finally chose a horse that was painted in shades of purple and green, with stars scattered across its body. As she climbed onto it, the old man smiled at me. "Beautiful craftsmanship," I said, trying to make conversation. "Yes," he replied. "Each horse has its own story, its own purpose. They have been traveling with me for many years." "How many years?" "More than you might think." The carousel began to turn, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The haunting music grew louder, and I found myself mesmerized by the movement of the horses. They seemed to move more naturally than mechanical horses should, rising and falling in a rhythm that looked almost like real galloping. Alina was laughing and waving at me as she went around, and I was happy to see her enjoying herself. But as the carousel continued to turn, I began to notice something strange. The other horses, the ones without riders, were not empty. At first I thought it was just shadows, tricks of the light from the colorful bulbs that decorated the carousel. But as I looked more carefully, I could see figures sitting on the horses. Translucent, ghostly figures that became clearer the longer I watched. There was a young woman in a dress from the 1920s, sitting side saddle on the white horse. A little boy in knickers and suspenders rode the red horse, his face serious and sad. An elderly man in a military uniform sat on the black horse, staring straight ahead with empty eyes. I rubbed my eyes, thinking perhaps I was more tired than I had realized. But when I looked again, the figures were still there, becoming more solid with each revolution of the carousel. "Puppo," Alina called out as she passed me. "Look at all the other riders!" My blood went cold. If Alina could see them too, then I was not imagining things. I walked closer to the carousel, trying to get a better look at the ghostly riders. As I did, the old operator stepped up beside me. "You can see them," he said. It was not a question. I asked. "Passengers," he said simply. "People who chose to stay." "Stay where?" "On the carousel. It is a special carousel, you see. It does not just go around in circles. It travels through time, through memory, through the spaces between what was and what might have been." I looked at Alina, still laughing as her horse rose and fell. "I want her off of there. Now." "I am afraid that is not possible," the old man said. "Not until she makes her choice." "What choice?" "The same choice they all made," he said, gesturing to the ghostly riders. "Whether to return to the world of pain and disappointment and uncertainty, or to stay here where she can be happy forever." The carousel was slowing down now, and I could hear Alina calling out in confusion. "Puppo, something is wrong," she said. "I cannot get off the horse." I tried to climb onto the carousel platform, but it was as if there was an invisible wall preventing me from getting closer. "Let her go," I demanded. "It is not my decision to make," the old man said. "It is hers." The carousel came to a complete stop, but Alina remained seated on her horse. The ghostly riders were fully visible now, and I could see that they were all looking at her with expressions of welcome and invitation. "Alina," I called out. "You need to get off the carousel now." "I cannot, Puppo," she said, and there were tears in her eyes. "My legs will not move." "That is because part of her wants to stay," the old man explained. "Part of her is tired of the fighting and the confusion and the pain of growing up. The carousel offers an alternative. Eternal childhood, eternal happiness, eternal peace." "She is just a child," I said. "She does not understand what she is choosing." Children understand more than adults give them credit for. They understand that the world is full of suffering, that growing up means accepting disappointment and loss and heartbreak. I looked at Alina, sitting motionless on the purple and green horse. The ghostly riders were reaching out to her, trying to convince her to join them. "Alina," I called out, "listen to me. I know things have been difficult at home. I know your parents are fighting and you feel like it is your fault. But running away will not solve anything." "I do not want to run away," she said. "I just want the pain to stop." Pain is part of life, agapimu, I said using the Greek term of endearment, but so is joy, so is love, so is hope. But what if the pain is stronger than the joy? Then you fight it. You fight it with the help of people who love you. You fight it by remembering that pain is temporary, but the good things in life can last forever if you let them. The ghostly riders were becoming more insistent now, reaching out to touch Elena, trying to pull her into their eternal circle. But she was looking at me, and I could see the conflict in her eyes. "Tell me about the good things, Pepo," she said. So I did. I told her about the day she was born and how proud her father was. I told her about the time we made baklava together when she was 8 years old, and how she got honey all over herself but refused to give up until we had made the perfect batch. I told her about her first day of school and how brave she was even though she was scared. I told her about her grandmother Maria and how much she would have loved to meet her granddaughter. I told her about the restaurant and how someday she could help me run it if she wanted to. I told her about all the places she had not seen yet, all the people she had not met, all the experiences she had not had. "But what about the divorce?" she asked. "What about the fighting?" "Your parents are good people who are going through a difficult time," I said. "But they both love you more than anything in the world, and no matter what happens between them, that will never change." The ghostly riders were fading now, becoming translucent again. Elena was looking at them, then at me, then at the old carousel operator. "If I stay," she asked him, "will I really be happy forever?" "You will never feel pain again," he said. "You will never be disappointed or hurt or lonely. But will I feel anything else?" The old man hesitated. "Happiness is all you need." "No," Elena said, and her voice was stronger now. "Happiness without sadness is not really happiness at all. It is just nothing." She climbed down from the horse, and as soon as her feet touched the platform, the invisible barrier that had been keeping me out disappeared. I rushed to her and pulled her into my arms. The ghostly riders were fading away completely now, and the old carousel operator looked disappointed but not surprised. "You are making a mistake," he said to Elena. "The world will hurt you again." "Yes," she said, "but it will also surprise me and challenge me and help me become who I am supposed to be." We walked away from the carousel and did not look back. As we reached the main part of Luna Park, I heard the haunting music start up again, and I knew the old man was looking for his next passenger. On the subway ride home, Elena was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, "Popo, do you think those people on the carousel were real?" "I think they were real once," I said, "but they gave up their reality for the illusion of eternal happiness." "Do you think I made the right choice?" I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "I think you made the brave choice, and sometimes that is the same thing." Elena stayed with me for the rest of the summer, and by the time she went back to California, she was a different girl. Still troubled by her parents' divorce, still struggling with the pain of growing up, but stronger somehow. More determined to face her problems instead of running from them. She calls me every week now, and she tells me about school and her friends and her plans for the future. She is applying to colleges, thinking about studying business so she can help me expand the restaurant into a chain. Sometimes she asks me if I ever think about the carousel, and I tell her the truth. I think about it often, especially when I see young people who look lost and hopeless. I wonder how many of them would choose to stay if they were given the option. But I also think about Elena and how she chose the difficult path of real life over the easy path of eternal childhood. And I am proud of her for that choice, even though I know it means she will face pain and disappointment and heartbreak in the years to come, because that is what it means to be human, to choose hope over despair, growth over stagnation, reality over illusion. The carousel is still out there somewhere, I am sure, still offering lost souls the chance to escape from the world. But I hope that, when people are faced with that choice, they remember that the pain of living is worth it for the joy of being alive. Story 9. The Strength Test. Name's Ravi Patel, and I run a small electronics repair shop in Edison, New Jersey. Been doing it for about 15 years now, ever since I got laid off from my engineering job at Bell Labs. It's not glamorous work, but it pays the bills and lets me be my own boss. I'm 41 years old, married to Priya for 18 years, and we have 2 kids. Arjun is 14 and thinks he knows everything, and Mira is 12 and actually might know everything. They're good kids, but like all teenagers, they think their dad is boring and embarrassing. This story happened last summer, in July of 2023. The whole family was going through a rough patch. Business had been slow because everyone just throws away broken electronics these days instead of fixing them. Preya had been working double shifts at the hospital where she's a nurse, trying to make up for the lost income. The kids were bored and restless, stuck at home for the summer because we couldn't afford to send them to camp. When I saw that a small carnival had set up in the parking lot of the old Circuit City on Route 1, I thought it might be a good way to cheer everyone up. We didn't have a lot of money to spend, but maybe we could afford a few rides and some cotton candy. The carnival was nothing fancy. Just a handful of rides, some game booths, and a few food trucks. But the kids were excited, and even Preya seemed to perk up a little when she saw the Ferris wheel lit up against the evening sky. We started with the easy stuff. The kids rode the tilt-a-whirl while Preya and I watched from a bench, sharing a funnel cake and trying to remember what it felt like to be young and carefree. Then we all rode the Ferris wheel together, and for a few minutes it felt like we were a normal family again. After that, the kids wanted to try their luck at the games. Arjun was determined to win a giant stuffed panda at the basketball shooting game, while Mira was fascinated by the ring toss. I gave them each $10 and told them to make it last. That's when I noticed the strength test game. You know the kind I'm talking about. A tall pole with a bell at the top, and you swing a big hammer to try to ring it. Usually it's run by some muscle-bound guy who makes jokes about weaklings and challenges men to prove their masculinity. But this one was different. The man running it was probably in his 60s, thin and wary, wearing a simple white t-shirt and jeans. He wasn't calling out to customers or making a big show. He was just standing there quietly, watching people walk by. The game itself looked old, like it had been around for decades. The pole was made of dark wood instead of metal, and it was covered with carved symbols that looked almost like hieroglyphics. The hammer was massive, much bigger than the ones you usually see at these games. I'm not a particularly strong guy. I'm 5'7" and weigh maybe 140 pounds. I spend my days hunched over tiny electronic components, not lifting weights or doing manual labor. But something about that game called to me. Maybe it was because I'd been feeling so powerless lately. Powerless to fix my business, powerless to help my family, powerless to change anything about our situation. The idea of swinging a hammer and ringing a bell seemed like a simple, straightforward way to prove I still had some strength left. I walked over to the game and the old man smiled at me. "Care to test your strength, friend?" "How much?" I asked. $5 for 3 swings. Ring the bell once, and you win any prize you want. I looked at the prizes hanging from the booth. They were the usual carnival stuff, mostly stuffed animals and cheap toys. But there was one prize that caught my attention. It was a small wooden box about the size of a jewelry box with the same strange symbols carved into its surface as the ones on the pole. "What's in the box?" I asked. The old man's smile widened. "That depends on who wins it. The box shows different things to different people." "That's a strange answer." "It's a strange box." I handed him $5 and picked up the hammer. It was heavier than I expected, and the handle was worn smooth by thousands of hands. As I lifted it over my head, I felt a strange tingling sensation in my arms. My first swing was weak, barely moving the indicator halfway up the pole. The old man nodded encouragingly. "Good form. Try putting your whole body into it." My second swing was better, sending the indicator about 3/4 of the way to the bell. I could hear Arjun cheering me on from across the midway. For my third swing, I closed my eyes and thought about everything that had been weighing me down. The unpaid bills, the stress on my marriage, the disappointment in my children's eyes when I had to say no to things they wanted. I channeled all of that frustration and anger into the swing. The hammer came down with a force I didn't know I possessed. The indicator shot up the pole like a rocket and struck the bell with a resounding clang that seemed to echo across the entire carnival. The old man clapped slowly. "Very impressive. Most people can't ring the bell on their first try." "I get to choose any prize I want?" I asked, still breathing hard from the exertion. "Any prize at all." I pointed to the wooden box. "I'll take that one." He reached up and took the box down from its hook. As he handed it to me, our fingers touched briefly, and I felt that same tingling sensation I'd experienced when holding the hammer. "A word of advice," he said quietly. "Be careful what you wish for when you open it." I was about to ask him what he meant, but Preya and the kids came running over to congratulate me on ringing the bell. By the time I looked back at the game booth, the old man was busy with another customer. We spent another hour at the carnival, but I kept thinking about the wooden box in my jacket pocket. It felt warm against my chest, and occasionally I could swear I heard something moving inside it. When we got home, I went into my workshop in the basement and examined the box more carefully. The symbols carved into its surface were unlike anything I'd ever seen. They weren't Egyptian hieroglyphics or Chinese characters or Sanskrit. They looked almost organic, like they'd grown into the wood rather than being carved by human hands. There was no visible latch or hinge, but when I pressed on one of the symbols, the box opened with a soft click. Inside was a single piece of paper, folded into a small square. I unfolded it and found a handwritten note in elegant script. Your strength has been measured and found worthy. You have 3 wishes. Use them wisely, for each wish granted will require a payment that you may not be prepared to make. I stared at the note for a long time, wondering if this was someone's idea of a joke. 3 wishes, like a genie in a lamp. It was ridiculous. But as I held the paper, the words began to glow with a soft blue light, and I could feel something in the air around me, a sense of possibility and power that made my skin tingle. I thought about my first wish for a long time. It seemed obvious. Money. We needed money to pay our bills, to fix our problems, to give our kids the life they deserved. I wished for enough money to solve all of our financial problems. I said out loud, feeling foolish but unable to stop myself. The paper in my hands grew warm, and the blue glow intensified. Then it faded, and the paper turned to ash that crumbled between my fingers. I waited for something to happen, but nothing did. The workshop looked the same, I felt the same, and there was no pile of money anywhere to be seen. I went upstairs feeling disappointed and embarrassed. Priya was already in bed, reading a book, and the kids were in their rooms doing homework. "How was your evening?" she asked without looking up from her book. "Fine," I said, "just tinkering around in the workshop." The next morning, I got a phone call that changed everything. It was from a lawyer in Manhattan telling me that my great-uncle Rajesh had died and left me his entire estate. I barely remembered Uncle Rajesh, who had moved to America decades before my parents and had never married or had children. According to the lawyer, the estate was worth over $2 million. I hung up the phone in shock. It couldn't be a coincidence, could it? I'd wished for enough money to solve our financial problems, and less than 12 hours later I was inheriting a fortune. But as the day went on, I started to feel uneasy about the whole thing. Uncle Rajesh had been in good health as far as I knew. He was only 72, and when I called the hospital where he'd died, they said it had been sudden and unexpected. Heart attack in his sleep. Had my wish killed him? I tried to push the thought out of my mind. People die of heart attacks all the time. It was just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The wooden box was still sitting on my workbench, and when I opened it again, there was another piece of paper inside. This one read, "First wish granted. Payment received. 2 wishes remain." I stared at the paper, my hands shaking. Payment received. What did that mean? Had Uncle Rajesh's life been the payment for my wish? I should have thrown the box away right then. I should have burned it or buried it or thrown it in the river. But I didn't, because despite my guilt and fear, I couldn't stop thinking about how much that money was going to help my family. For the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself that I was overthinking things. The inheritance was processed quickly, and suddenly we had more money than we'd ever dreamed of. I paid off all our debts, bought Priya a new car, enrolled the kids in the summer programs they'd been wanting to attend. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd made a terrible mistake. The second wish came to me in August, when Arjun came home from his summer program with a black eye and a split lip. Some older kids had been bullying him, calling him names and pushing him around. He was trying to act tough, but I could see how much it was hurting him. That night, as I sat in my workshop staring at the wooden box, I found myself thinking about how helpless I felt. I couldn't protect my son from bullies. I couldn't make the world a kinder place for him. Before I knew what I was doing, I was opening the box and speaking my second wish. I wish for my son to be strong enough to defend himself against anyone who tries to hurt him. Again, the paper glowed blue and turned to ash, and again I waited to see what would happen. The change in Arjun was gradual at first. He started working out in his room, doing push-ups and sit-ups. His appetite increased, and he began putting on muscle mass at a rate that seemed impossible for a 14-year-old boy. Within a month, he'd grown 3 inches taller and gained 20 pounds of solid muscle. The bullies at school stopped bothering him, and he joined the football team even though he'd never shown any interest in sports before. But the changes didn't stop there. Arjun became aggressive, quick to anger, always looking for a fight. He started getting in trouble at school for picking on smaller kids. The sweet, gentle boy I'd raised was disappearing, replaced by someone I barely recognized. The worst part was that I could see the confusion in his eyes. He knew something was wrong, but he couldn't control it. The strength I'd wished for him was consuming him, turning him into the very thing he'd been afraid of. When I opened the box again, the message was the same. Second wish granted. Payment received. One wish remains, but this time I knew what the payment was. I was losing my son, bit by bit, day by day. The strength was making him physically powerful, but emotionally hollow. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to fix what I'd done. The obvious answer was to use my third wish to undo the damage, but I was terrified of what the payment might be this time. It was Priya who finally convinced me to act. She cornered me in the workshop one evening in September after Arjun had been suspended from school for fighting. "Something is wrong with our son," she said, "and I think you know what it is." I tried to deny it, but she wouldn't let me. She'd always been smarter than me, more perceptive. She knew I was hiding something, so I told her everything. About the wooden box, about the wishes, about the payments I'd unknowingly made. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more horrified with each detail. "You have to fix this," she said when I finished. "Whatever it costs, you have to use that last wish to fix this." "What if the payment is your life?" I asked. "What if it's Mira's life? What if the box wants to take away everything I care about?" "Then that's a risk we have to take," she said. "Because what's happening to Arjun isn't living, it's just existing as something he was never meant to be." She was right, of course. I'd been so focused on the potential cost of the third wish that I'd ignored the ongoing cost of the second one. Every day that passed, Arjun became less like himself and more like a stranger. That night, I opened the wooden box for the third and final time. I wish for my family to be whole and happy, the way we were before I made any wishes at all, I said. The paper glowed brighter than ever before, so bright that I had to close my eyes. When the light faded, the paper was gone and the box was empty. I waited for something terrible to happen. For the house to catch fire, for sirens to wail in the distance, for some sign that the payment was being extracted. But nothing happened. I went upstairs and checked on my family. Priya was sleeping peacefully. Mira was curled up with her stuffed animals. And Arjun looked like himself again. The unnatural muscle mass was gone. The aggressive expression had faded from his face, and he looked like the gentle boy I remembered. In the morning, I checked our bank account and found that the inheritance money was gone. Not stolen, not transferred, just gone as if it had never existed. The bills were back, the stress was back, all of our financial problems had returned. But Arjun was himself again, and that was worth more than any amount of money. I threw the empty wooden box in the trash, but when I went to take the garbage out the next morning, it was gone. I never saw it again, and I hope I never do. We're back to where we started, financially speaking. The electronics repair business is still struggling. Priya is still working double shifts, and we still can't afford to give our kids everything they want. But we're a family again. Arjun is back to being the sweet, thoughtful boy he always was. Mira still thinks she knows everything, and she probably does. And Priya and I are working together to build a life that doesn't depend on magic or wishes or shortcuts. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd never gone to that carnival, never rung that bell, never won that box. Would we have found another way to solve our problems? Would we have been stronger for facing them on our own? I'll never know for sure. But I've learned that strength isn't about being able to swing a hammer hard enough to ring a bell. Real strength is about facing your problems honestly, accepting help when you need it, and never giving up on the people you love. The old man at the carnival was right about one thing. I should have been careful what I wished for, because sometimes getting what you want is the worst thing that can happen to you. Story 10. The Duck Pond. This is going to sound mental, but I need to get it out of my head somehow. My name's Siobhan O'Malley, I'm 29 years old, and I live in a tiny village called Dunmore East in County Waterford, Ireland. It's the sort of place where everyone knows everyone, and nothing interesting ever happens. Except for what happened to me last autumn. I work as a primary school teacher in the village, and I live alone in a small cottage that belonged to my grandmother. It's a quiet life, maybe too quiet for someone my age, but I like the peace of it. I have my books, my garden, and the sea just a short walk from my front door. Last October, there was a traveling fair that came through our area. It wasn't much, just a few rides and games set up in the field behind Murphy's pub. But it was the most excitement we'd had in months, so naturally the whole village turned out to see it. I went on the Saturday evening with my friend Maeve, who teaches at the secondary school in Waterford City. We'd had a few pence at Murphy's first, so we were in good spirits and ready to act like children again. The fair was smaller than I'd expected. Maybe 6 or 7 attractions total. There was a small Ferris wheel, a set of bumper cars, a hook-a-duck game, and a few other bits and bobs. Nothing fancy, but charming in its own way. Maeve wanted to try the bumper cars first, so we climbed into the little electric cars and spent 10 minutes trying to crash into each other while laughing like schoolgirls. After that, we shared a bag of chips and wandered around looking at the other attractions. That's when I noticed the duck pond game. Now, I've seen plenty of these games before. You pay your money, you pick up a rubber duck from a small pond, and you win a prize based on what's written on the bottom of the duck. Simple enough. But this one was different. For starters, the pond was much larger than usual, maybe 3 meters across and perfectly circular. The water was so clear and still that it looked like glass, and the rubber ducks floating on the surface were all white instead of the usual yellow. The woman running the game was probably in her 50s, with long gray hair and wearing a flowing dress that looked like it belonged to another century. She had the most piercing blue eyes I'd ever seen, and when she smiled at me, I felt like she was looking right through me. "Would you like to try your luck, dear?" she asked in an accent I couldn't place. It sounded almost Irish, but not quite. "How much?" I asked. €2 for 1 duck, €5 for 3 ducks. I handed her €5 and stepped up to the edge of the pond. The ducks were all identical, floating peacefully on the still water. I reached for the nearest one, but as soon as my hand touched the water, I felt a strange tingling sensation. The water was warm, much warmer than it should have been on a cool October evening. And as I lifted the duck out of the pond, I could swear I saw something moving in the depths below. I turned the duck over to see what prize I'd won, but instead of a number or a symbol, there was a single word written in elegant script: truth. "What does this mean?" I asked the woman. She smiled that piercing smile again. "It means you've won something more valuable than any stuffed animal or cheap toy. You've won the ability to see things as they really are." Before I could ask what she meant, Maeve grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the game. "Come on, Siobhan, let's try the Ferris wheel before they close." I followed her, but I kept looking back at the duck pond and the strange woman who ran it. There was something about her that made me uneasy, though I couldn't put my finger on what it was. We rode the Ferris wheel and played a few more games before heading back to Murphy's for a nightcap. But all evening, I kept thinking about that duck and the word written on its bottom. Truth. What kind of truth was she talking about? I found out the next morning. I woke up early, as I always do on Sundays, and made myself a cup of tea before settling down with the Sunday papers. But as I read the headlines, something strange happened. I could see beyond the words on the page to what was really being said. A story about a local politician's charity work revealed itself to be a cover for embezzlement. An article about a new housing development showed me the environmental damage it would cause. A piece about a missing person made it clear that the police knew exactly what had happened but were covering it up. At first, I thought I was just being cynical, but as the day went on, the ability to see through lies and deception became stronger. When I went to the shop for milk, I could tell that Miss Flanagan was having an affair with the postman just by looking at her. When I passed the church, I could see that Father McKenna was struggling with doubts about his faith. It was overwhelming and frightening. I didn't want to know these things about people I'd known my whole life. But it got worse. On Monday morning, I went to school as usual, but I could barely function. Every time one of my students spoke to me, I could see the truth behind their words. Little Emma Murphy wasn't just tired because she'd stayed up late watching television. She was tired because her parents had been fighting all night, and she was afraid they were going to get divorced. Young Tommy Walsh wasn't just being difficult in class because he was bored. He was acting out because his father had been drinking again and had hit him the night before. Sarah O'Brien wasn't just quiet and withdrawn because she was shy. She was being bullied by the other children and was too ashamed to tell anyone. By lunchtime, I was a wreck. I couldn't handle seeing so much pain and deception, especially in children who should have been innocent and carefree. I called in sick for the rest of the week and locked myself in my cottage, trying to figure out what was happening to me. But even alone, the visions continued. I could see the truth about everything around me, the history of my cottage, the secrets of my neighbors, the lies that people told themselves to get through each day. It was too much. I felt like I was drowning in other people's truths. On Friday evening, I decided I had to go back to the fair and find the woman who had given me that cursed duck. I needed to know how to make it stop. But when I got to the field behind Murphy's pub, there was nothing there. No rides, no games, no sign that a fair had ever been there at all. Just an empty field with some tire tracks in the mud. I asked around the village, but nobody seemed to remember the fair. When I mentioned it to Maeve, she looked at me like I was mad. "What fair?" she asked. "There hasn't been a traveling fair through here in years." "We went together last Saturday," I insisted. "We rode the bumper cars and the Ferris wheel. You were there when I played the duck pond game." But Maeve just shook her head. "Subhan, we spent Saturday evening at Murphy's having a few pints and watching the football match. You've been working too hard. Maybe you should take a holiday." I began to wonder if I was losing my mind. Had I imagined the whole thing? Was the ability to see truth just a symptom of some kind of mental breakdown? But the visions continued. If anything, they got stronger. I could see that the shopkeeper was watering down his milk. I could see that the mayor was taking bribes from developers. I could see that half the marriages in the village were built on lies and compromise. And the worst part was, I couldn't turn it off. The truth was always there, lurking behind every smile, every greeting, every casual conversation. I stopped going out during the day. I stopped answering my phone. I told the school that I was having a family emergency and needed extended leave. I became a hermit in my own home, afraid to interact with anyone because I couldn't handle seeing their secrets. That's when she came to me. I was sitting in my kitchen one evening in November, trying to read a book and ignore the visions that kept flashing through my mind when there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find the woman from the duck pond game standing on my doorstep. She looked exactly the same as she had at the fair, down to the flowing dress and piercing blue eyes. "Hello, Siobhan," she said. "May I come in?" I should have slammed the door in her face. I should have called the guards. But I was so desperate for answers that I stepped aside and let her enter. She settled herself in my sitting room like she belonged there, and I made us both tea with shaking hands. "You're wondering why I gave you this gift," she said without preamble. "Gift?" I laughed bitterly. "You call this a gift? I can't function. I can't work. I can't even have a normal conversation with anyone because all I can see are their lies and secrets." "Truth is always a burden," she said calmly, "but it's also a responsibility. I don't want this responsibility. I want you to take it back." She sipped her tea and studied me with those intense blue eyes. "I'm afraid that's not possible. Once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it, but you can learn to use it." "Use it for what?" "To help people. To make things better. To shine light into the dark corners of the world." I stared at her. "You're not human, are you?" She smiled. "What do you think?" And suddenly I could see her truth, just as I could see everyone else's. She was old, far older than she appeared. She had been traveling for centuries, moving from place to place, giving the gift of truth to those she deemed worthy. "Why me?" I asked. "Because you were ready for it. Because you had the strength to handle it, even if you don't believe that right now." "I don't feel strong. I feel like I'm falling apart." "That's normal. Everyone goes through this period of adjustment. But eventually, you'll learn to control it instead of letting it control you." "And if I can't?" Her expression grew sad. "Then you'll go mad, like some of the others have." "Others?" "You're not the first person I've given this gift to, Siobhan. There have been many over the years. Some learned to use it wisely. Others," she shrugged, "others couldn't handle the weight of so much truth." I felt a chill run down my spine. What happened to them? Some took their own lives. Others retreated from the world entirely and lived as hermits. A few simply went insane. And you keep doing this, knowing what it might do to people. "The world needs people who can see the truth," she said, "even if it destroys some of them in the process." I wanted to be angry with her, but I could see the truth behind her words. She genuinely believed she was doing something necessary, something important. The fact that it caused suffering was a price she was willing to pay. "How do I learn to control it?" I asked. "Practice. Start small. Use your gift to help one person at a time. Don't try to fix everything at once." She stood up to leave, but I grabbed her arm. "Wait. What's your name? What are you?" "I have many names," she said, "but you can call me Bridget. As for what I am, I think you already know." And I did. She was one of the old ones, the beings that existed long before Christianity came to Ireland, a goddess, perhaps, or something close to it. Still walking the world, still interfering in human affairs, still believing that truth was worth any price. After she left, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, thinking about what she'd said. I could continue to hide from my gift, let it drive me mad, or I could try to use it to help people. The next morning, I called the school and told them I was ready to come back to work. It wasn't easy. The first few days were torture, seeing all the pain and deception in my students' lives. But gradually, I began to understand how I could help. I started small, just as Bridget had suggested. When I saw that little Tommy Walsh was being abused at home, I found a way to connect him with the school counselor. When I realized that Emma Murphy's parents were headed for divorce, I arranged for them to meet with Father McKenna for marriage counseling. I couldn't fix everything, but I could shine light into some of the dark corners of people's lives. It's been almost a year now since that night at the fair that may or may not have existed. I've learned to live with my gift, though it's still a burden sometimes. I see too much, know too much, carry too many secrets. But I've also been able to help people in ways I never could before. I've prevented suicides, exposed corruption, and helped families heal from years of lies and deception. The truth is a terrible thing sometimes, but it's also the only thing that can set people free. I still live alone in my grandmother's cottage, and I probably always will. It's hard to form relationships when you can see through every lie, every pretense, every social nicety. But I've found a kind of peace in my solitude. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is howling off the sea, I think I can hear Bridget's voice carried on the air, whispering words of encouragement to all of us who carry the burden of truth. We are the ones who see what others cannot. We are the guardians of honesty in a world built on lies. And even though it hurts sometimes, even though it isolates us from the rest of humanity, we are necessary, because somebody has to know the truth, even if nobody wants to hear it. Story 11, The Shooting Gallery. The thing about working night security is that you see a lot of weird stuff. Most of it's explainable if you think about it long enough, but some of it stays with you. I'm Gunther Hoffman, been doing security work here in Milwaukee for the past 22 years. Started when I got out of the Army in 2001, and I've been walking empty buildings and parking lots ever since. I'm 54 years old now, divorced twice, no kids, live by myself in a small apartment near Brady Street, spend my days sleeping and my nights making sure nothing gets stolen or vandalized. It's not exciting work, but it's steady, and after 2 tours in Afghanistan, I appreciate boring. This happened about 6 months ago in March of 2024. I was working a temporary assignment at the State Fair Park, keeping an eye on some equipment that was being stored there over the winter. The fairgrounds are pretty creepy at night when they're empty, all those dark buildings and empty midways that are supposed to be full of people having fun. I was doing my usual rounds around midnight when I noticed lights coming from the direction of the midway. That was strange, because all the power to that section was supposed to be shut off. I grabbed my flashlight and headed over to investigate. What I found didn't make any sense. There was a single game booth set up right in the middle of the midway, fully operational with bright lights and music playing. It was a shooting gallery, the kind where you use an air rifle to knock down targets and win prizes. The weird thing was, I'd walked past that exact spot maybe 2 hours earlier, and there had been nothing there. Just empty concrete and some scattered trash. The man running the booth was probably in his 40s, wearing a red vest and a straw hat like something out of the 1890s. He was arranging prizes on the shelves behind the counter, whistling along to the carnival music that was playing from hidden speakers. I approached cautiously, my hand resting on the radio clipped to my belt. "Excuse me, sir. The fairgrounds are closed. You can't be here." He looked up and smiled at me, and I noticed his teeth were too white and too perfect. "Good evening, officer. Beautiful night for some target practice, don't you think? I'm not a police officer, I'm private security. And like I said, the fairgrounds are closed. You need to pack up and leave." "Oh, but I have a permit," he said, reaching into his vest pocket. "See, all official and proper." He handed me a piece of paper that looked old, like it was made of parchment instead of regular paper. The writing on it was in some kind of fancy script that was hard to read, but it seemed to be some kind of permit or license. "This doesn't look official to me," I said, handing it back. "And even if it was, you can't just set up in the middle of the night without notifying security." "Why don't you try a game while you're here?" he said, ignoring my objections. "First game is free for law enforcement." "I told you I'm not law enforcement. Military then. I can always tell. You have that bearing, that way of standing Afghanistan." I stared at him. There was no way he could have known that just by looking at me. "How did you?" "Lucky guess. So what do you say? 1 free game, then I'll pack up and leave you alone." Every instinct I had told me to call this in, to get some real cops down here to deal with this guy. But something about his smile, about the way the lights from the booth seemed to dance and flicker, made me hesitate. "What kind of targets?" I asked. He gestured to the back wall of the booth, where a series of mechanical targets were set up. They looked like the usual carnival fare, metal ducks and rabbits that would pop up and down when you hit them. But as I looked closer, I realized they weren't ducks and rabbits at all. They were people. Tiny metal figures that looked like soldiers, like civilians, like the kind of people I'd seen in Afghanistan. And they were moving in ways that seemed too realistic, too human. "Those are some detailed targets," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh yes, very detailed. Each one tells a story, if you know how to look." He handed me an air rifle, and I checked it automatically. It was heavier than the usual Carnival guns, and it felt real, like an actual weapon instead of a toy. "What do I win if I hit the targets?" I asked. "That depends on which targets you choose to hit," he said. "Some prizes are better than others." I raised the rifle and aimed at one of the moving figures. As I looked down the sight, the figure seemed to grow larger, more detailed. It was a man in military fatigues, carrying an assault rifle, moving through what looked like a marketplace. I knew that marketplace. I'd been there, in Kandahar, on a patrol that went wrong. My finger tightened on the trigger, but I didn't fire. "What kind of game is this?" "The kind that lets you rewrite history," the man in the straw hat said. "The kind that gives you a second chance to make different choices." Another target popped up, and this one made my blood run cold. It was a woman in a blue burqa, carrying a small child. I remembered her too. She'd been running across the street when the shooting started, trying to get her kid to safety. I'd had a clear shot at the sniper who was targeting her, but I'd hesitated. By the time I fired, it was too late. The woman and her child were both dead. "If you hit that target," the man said softly, "you save them both." "That's impossible. It happened 15 years ago." Time is more flexible than people think, especially here, especially now. I could see more targets now, more scenes from my time in Afghanistan playing out in miniature on the back wall of the booth. Every mistake I'd made, every life I could have saved, every decision that still haunted me. "What's the catch?" I asked. "No catch. Just consequences. Every life you save here means someone else dies instead. Every choice you change creates new regrets to replace the old ones." I lowered the rifle. "I don't want to play this game." "Are you sure? Look at that target there, the one on the left." I looked and saw a figure that made my heart stop. It was Danny Morrison, my squad mate, my friend. He was reaching for an IED that we hadn't spotted in time. I'd been the one who was supposed to check that area. I'd gotten distracted, missed the device, and Danny had paid the price. He'd lost both legs and spent the next 10 years fighting depression and addiction before finally taking his own life. "You could save him," the man said. "One shot, and Danny Morrison goes home whole." My hands were shaking as I raised the rifle again. All I had to do was pull the trigger, and my friend would still be alive. His wife wouldn't be a widow, his kids wouldn't be fatherless. But I remembered what the man had said about consequences. "Who dies instead?" I asked. "Does it matter?" "Someone you don't know, someone whose death won't weigh on your conscience." "It matters to them. It matters to their family." "You're a good man, Gunther Hoffman. Most people would have fired by now." I looked at the targets again, at all the lives I could save, all the mistakes I could undo. It was tempting, so tempting that my finger was already tightening on the trigger. But then I thought about the butterfly effect, about how changing one thing in the past could change everything else. What if saving Danny meant that someone else in our squad died instead? What if saving the woman and her child meant that 10 other people were killed later? I set the rifle down on the counter. "I can't do it." "You're sure? This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity." "I'm sure. The past is the past. I have to live with my mistakes, not try to erase them." The man in the straw hat looked disappointed, but not surprised. "Most people make the same choice eventually. The wise ones anyway." "What happens to the people who don't choose wisely?" "They fire the rifle, change the past, and create new timelines where they have to live with different regrets. Some of them keep coming back, trying to fix their new mistakes, creating more and more timelines until they lose track of which reality they belong in." I shuddered, thinking about being trapped in an endless loop of trying to fix the past. "What are you?" I asked. "I'm a collector," he said. "I collect moments of regret, times when people wish they could go back and make different choices. There's a lot of power in that kind of emotion. And you feed on it. I preserve it. Regret is one of the most human emotions there is. Without it, people would never learn from their mistakes." The lights on the booth began to dim, and the mechanical target stopped moving. "Time for me to move on," the man said. "Thank you for not playing, Gunther. It shows character." "Wait," I called out as he started packing up his equipment. "Will I see you again?" "That depends on you. If you ever reach a point where you can't live with your regrets anymore, I'll be there. But I hope for your sake that day never comes." Within minutes, the booth was gone. packed away into a truck that I hadn't noticed before. The man tipped his hat to me and drove off into the night, leaving me standing alone on the empty midway. I finished my rounds and wrote up a report, but I didn't mention the shooting gallery. Who would believe a story like that? But I've been thinking about it ever since. About the choices we make, about the weight of regret, about the temptation to try to fix the past instead of learning from it. I still have nightmares about Afghanistan sometimes. I still think about Danny Morrison and the woman in the blue burqa and all the other lives that were lost on my watch. But I've made peace with those memories as much as anyone can, because the truth is, we all make mistakes, we all have regrets. But trying to erase them isn't the answer. The answer is learning to live with them, to carry them without letting them destroy us. The man in the straw hat was right about one thing. Regret is one of the most human emotions there is. And maybe that's not such a bad thing after all. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice that night. Sometimes I think about Danny and wonder if saving him would have been worth whatever consequences followed. But then I remember what the man said about people who keep coming back trying to fix their mistakes, getting lost in alternate timelines. And I know I made the right choice. The past is the past. All we can do is try to make better choices in the future, even if it means living with the weight of what we've done. Story 12. The Tunnel of Love. I'm not sure why I'm writing this down. Maybe because I need to tell someone, and there's nobody in my life who would believe me. My name is Francesca Romano. I'm 35 years old, and I've been single for the past 4 years since my divorce from Tony. I live in a small apartment in the north end of Boston, work as a paralegal for a law firm downtown, and spend most of my evenings alone with a glass of wine and whatever's on Netflix. It's not the life I imagined for myself when I was younger, but it's peaceful. No drama, no arguments, no disappointments. Or at least it was peaceful until last summer. It was late July, and my sister Maria had been nagging me for weeks to get out more, to meet people, to stop hiding in my apartment like some kind of hermit. She'd signed us both up for a singles mixer that was being held at a street festival in the South End, and she wouldn't take no for an answer. "Frankie, you can't spend the rest of your life alone," she kept saying. "You're 35, not 95. There are plenty of good men out there." I'd heard this speech 100 times before, but Maria is persistent when she wants to be. So on Saturday evening, I put on a dress that I hadn't worn since my divorce and let her drag me down to the festival. The South End was packed with people, vendors selling everything from kettle corn to handmade jewelry, and a small carnival setup in one of the parks. The singles mixer was supposed to be at a wine bar on Tremont Street, but Maria insisted we walk around the festival first. "It's more relaxed this way," she said. "More. Maybe you'll meet someone while we're just having fun instead of at some awkward organized event." I went along with it, mostly because I was dreading the mixer. The idea of standing around making small talk with strangers while everyone sized each other up like livestock made my skin crawl. The carnival was small but charming, with twinkling lights strung between the trees and the sound of children laughing on the rides. We bought some cotton candy and wandered around, watching families enjoy themselves and remembering when we were kids and our parents would take us to similar festivals. That's when I saw the Tunnel of Love. It was tucked away in a corner of the park, almost hidden behind some trees. The entrance was decorated with pink and red hearts, and there was a sign that read, "Find your true love, guaranteed results." Maria spotted it at the same time I did and grabbed my arm. "Oh my God, Frankie, we have to do this. It's so cheesy, it's perfect." "Are you kidding me? I'm not getting in some tacky boat ride designed for teenagers." "Come on, it'll be fun. When's the last time you did something spontaneous?" Before I could protest further, she was dragging me toward the entrance. The man taking tickets was probably in his 60s, with silver hair and wearing a red velvet jacket that looked like it belonged in a different century. "Good evening, ladies," he said in a voice that carried a slight accent I couldn't identify. "Looking for love tonight?" "My sister is," Maria said, pushing me forward. "She's been single for 4 years and needs all the help she can get." I felt my face burning with embarrassment. "Maria, stop." The man smiled at me with genuine kindness. "Love finds us when we're ready for it, not when we're looking for it. But sometimes a little magic doesn't hurt." "How much?" Maria asked, already reaching for her wallet. "No charge for someone who truly needs to find their path," he said, looking directly at me. "But I should warn you, this isn't an ordinary tunnel of love. The boats don't just take you through pretty scenery. They take you through possibilities." "What kind of possibilities?" I asked. "The kind that show you what your life could be like with different choices, different partners, different paths." Maria laughed. That sounds amazing. Come on, Frankie. Against my better judgment, I let her pull me onto the small boat. It was just big enough for 2 people, with heart-shaped seats and Cupid decorations that were so over the top they were almost endearing. The boat began moving slowly through the tunnel, and at first it was exactly what I'd expected. Cheesy decorations, soft romantic music, and animatronic cupids shooting foam arrows at us. Maria was giggling and taking selfies, clearly enjoying herself. But as we went deeper into the tunnel, things started to change. The decorations became more elaborate, more real. Instead of cheap plastic hearts, there were what looked like real flowers blooming along the walls. The music shifted from generic love songs to something more haunting and beautiful. And then I started seeing things that couldn't possibly be there. In one section of the tunnel, I saw myself sitting at a candlelit dinner table across from a man I didn't recognize. He was handsome in a quiet way, with dark hair and kind eyes, and we were talking and laughing like we'd known each other for years. "Did you see that?" I whispered to Maria. "See what?" she asked, looking around. "The fake waterfall. Yeah, it's pretty cool." But I hadn't been looking at a waterfall. I'd been looking at a scene of domestic happiness that felt more real than the boat I was sitting in. In the next section, I saw the same man again, but this time we were in a kitchen together, cooking dinner while music played in the background. He was making me laugh about something, and I looked genuinely happy in a way I hadn't been for years. "Maria, you have to see this," I said, pointing at the scene. But when she looked, all she saw were more decorations. "It's cute, I guess. Kind of old-fashioned." As we continued through the tunnel, I saw more scenes. The man and I walking on a beach, holding hands and watching the sunset. The 2 of us painting a nursery, preparing for a baby. Growing old together, sitting on a porch swing and watching our grandchildren play in the yard. Each scene was more detailed than the last, and I found myself drawn into them, wanting to reach out and touch this life that seemed so perfect, so complete. "Who is he?" I whispered to myself. "Who's who?" Maria asked. Before I could answer, the boat came to a stop. We were in a circular chamber at the heart of the tunnel, surrounded by mirrors that reflected our images back at us infinitely. But in the mirrors, I wasn't alone. The man from the visions was sitting next to me, his arm around my shoulders, both of us smiling. "Welcome to the center of all possibilities," a voice said. I looked around and saw the ticket taker standing on a small platform in the middle of the chamber. "This is where you choose your path." "What are you talking about?" Maria asked, but her voice sounded distant, like she was speaking from far away. "Your sister can't hear me," the man said to me. "This part is just for you, Francesca. You've seen what your life could be like. Now you have to decide if you want that life or if you prefer the one you have." "I don't understand. Who was that man in the visions?" "His name is David Chen. He's a pediatric nurse at Children's Hospital. He's 37 years old, divorced, no children. He volunteers at an animal shelter on weekends and reads poetry in his spare time." "How do you know all that?" "Because he's your perfect match, your soulmate, if you believe in such things. And right now, he's sitting alone in his apartment in Cambridge, wondering if he'll ever find someone to share his life with." I stared at the mirrors, at the image of myself with this man I'd never met. "But how is that possible? How can you show me someone I've never even seen before?" "Love isn't random, Francesca. There are patterns, connections that exist beyond what we can see or understand. The tunnel doesn't create love, it reveals it." "So what happens now? Do I just walk out of here and somehow bump into him?" "If you choose to. Or you can go back to your old life, your safe life, your lonely life. The choice is yours." I looked at Maria, who was staring blankly ahead like she was in some kind of trance. "What about my sister? She'll remember this as a fun ride through a cheesy tunnel of love, nothing more. And if I choose to meet this David person, then your life changes. You'll meet him within the week, and everything you saw in the visions will become possible. Not guaranteed, but possible." I thought about my quiet apartment, my predictable routine, my safe but empty life. Then I thought about the scenes I'd witnessed, the happiness and love and connection that seemed so real. What if it doesn't work out? What if we're not compatible in real life? Then you'll have tried. You'll have taken a chance instead of hiding from the possibility of getting hurt again. He was right, and I knew it. Ever since my divorce, I'd been so afraid of being disappointed again that I'd stopped trying altogether. I'd chosen safety over possibility, loneliness over risk. "I want to meet him," I said. The man smiled and nodded. "Then it's done." The mirrors began to spin around us, faster and faster, until I felt dizzy and had to close my eyes. When I opened them again, we were back in the regular tunnel, surrounded by the cheesy decorations and animatronic cupids. That was fun. Maria said, back to her normal self. Totally ridiculous, but fun. The boat carried us out of the tunnel and back to the entrance. The man in the red velvet jacket helped us out and smiled at me. "Enjoy your new adventure," he said quietly, so Maria couldn't hear. We went to the singles mixer after that, but I spent the whole evening distracted, thinking about what had happened in the tunnel. Maria introduced me to several men, but I couldn't focus on any of them. All I could think about was David Chen and whether I'd really meet him or if the whole thing had been some kind of elaborate hallucination. I found out on Tuesday. I was at the grocery store after work, trying to decide between two different types of pasta, when someone bumped into me from behind. I turned around to apologize and found myself looking into the kind eyes of the man from my visions. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I wasn't watching where I was going. It's okay?" I managed to say, even though my heart was pounding. "No harm done," he smiled, and it was exactly the same smile I'd seen in the tunnel. "I'm David, by the way. David Chen." "Francesca," I said. "Francesca Romano. Nice to meet you, Francesca. I don't suppose you'd like to get a coffee sometime? There's a great place just around the corner." I should have been surprised, should have questioned the coincidence. But somehow, it felt completely natural, like we were just picking up a conversation we'd been having for years. "I'd like that," I said. "We've been together for 8 months now, and everything I saw in the tunnel has started coming true. Not exactly the way I saw it, but close enough. We cook dinner together most nights. We've taken weekend trips to the beach, and last month he asked me to move in with him. I haven't told him about the tunnel of love, about the visions, or the choice I made. How could I explain something like that without sounding crazy? But sometimes, when we're sitting together on his couch watching a movie or walking through the park holding hands, I remember those scenes from the tunnel and realize that this is what happiness feels like. I don't know if what happened that night was real or just some kind of psychological trick. Maybe the man in the red velvet jacket was just a good judge of character who could tell I was ready to start dating again. Maybe David and I would have met anyway, through mutual friends or online dating or just random chance. But I don't think so. I think there really was something magical about that tunnel, something that could see the connections between people and help them find each other. Maria still doesn't remember anything unusual about the ride. When I've tried to bring it up, she just laughs and says it was a cute but cheesy attraction that we rode for fun. But I remember everything. The visions, the choice, the man who told me that love finds us when we're ready for it. And I'm grateful that I was finally ready to let it find me. David proposed to me last week on the same beach where I'd seen us walking in one of the visions. As he slipped the ring on my finger, I thought about that night in the tunnel and the choice that changed everything. Sometimes the best things in life require a leap of faith. Sometimes you have to trust in possibilities you can't see or understand. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, a cheesy carnival ride can show you exactly what you've been missing.